Slash! A blade of light ripped across my abdomen. I sucked in a sharp breath, blood rising hot and bitter in my throat. My knees buckled. The sword slipped from my shaking hand like it didn't belong to me anymore. So this is death. Just like that. The world smeared at the edges. Crumbling castle walls. The screams of my comrades as they fell one by one. And the man standing over me, hands soaked in red. All of it drowned in a haze. I'm Elysia Valen, swordswoman of the hero party. We were supposed to be humanity's last line. The strongest. The chosen ones meant to reach the Demon King and end the war. We didn't even make it to his throne room. And the one who killed us wasn't a demon. It was him, a human, a former classmate. Why? The word came out as a rasp, almost swallowed by the roar of flames and collapsing stone. Why you? If he had stood with us, we would have won. If he'd lifted his blade against the Demon King instead of against us. He tilted his head, like my question amused him. The boy I remembered from the academy was still there in his face, but the inside of him felt gone. Hollow. Scraped out. Huh. The protagonist party is dead. His laugh broke apart in his throat, jagged and miserable. Now, will the story change? Or will it crumble? Huh. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It wasn't joyful either. It sounded like someone who had fallen too far and didn't know how to stop. I never got an answer. Only that awful laughter, echoing as my vision sank into black. If there's a God out there, if you're listening, just give me one more chance. Let me go back, and I swear I'll kill you. Thud. Ha ha ha. I jolted upright, choking on air. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. Instinctively, my hands flew to my stomach. Nothing. No wound. No blood. No pain. I stared at my trembling fingers, then looked around like a madwoman, searching for the battlefield, for him, for anyone. Instead, I found soft sheets tangled around my legs. The ceiling above me wasn't cracked stone stained with smoke. It was smooth pale wood. A ceiling I knew. My ceiling. I sat up slowly, breath caught tight. My eyes swept the room. The dresser with the crooked drawer that always stuck. The shelf of dusty storybooks I never stopped rereading. The nicked corner of my desk from the time I dropped my sword during practice. Everything was exactly the way it used to be. Before the war. Before the blood. Before the graves. I was back in my childhood room. A dream? I blinked hard. Once. Twice. It felt too real. The air. The morning light on the floor. The faint smell of lavender soap and old paper. Could this actually be real? Elysia, breakfast's ready. A voice floated up from downstairs, bright and familiar. Still sleeping? You'll be late on your first day if you don't move. My whole body went cold. That voice. Mom. I threw myself out of bed and yanked open the door, nearly tripping down the stairs. In the kitchen, my mother hummed softly as she set warm bread on the table. By the window, holding a steaming mug of tea, sat my father with his newspaper. Dad, he looked up and smiled. There you are. You look awful, kiddo. Nightmare. I couldn't breathe. They were alive. Smiling. Whole. Here. Even if this was some cruel illusion, I didn't want it to end. Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. I missed you. Mom blinked, startled. Missed us? It's been one night, sweetheart. I shook my head and crossed the room in 2 steps, wrapping my arms around her like I was afraid she'd vanish. She laughed, confused. Elysia? What's gotten into you? You're alive? I whispered into her shoulder. Well, I sure hope so, she said, trying to make it light. Otherwise, I'd be a pretty bad ghost making breakfast. I held her a second longer, then turned to Dad, my voice breaking. I love you. He froze, then smiled carefully, exchanging a worried glance with Mom. I love you too, Pumpkin. But shouldn't you get dressed? I forced myself to nod. I'll get ready. Eat something first. Mom called after me. I will. I lied, already running upstairs before they could see my face fall apart again. Back in my room, I shut the door gently and leaned against it, legs shaky. I took in everything. My books, my old drawing in its cracked frame, the quiet piece of a life that hadn't been torn open yet. Nothing had changed. I stepped to the mirror. A girl stared back at me. No scars. No war-hardened eyes. No hands rough from years of battle. Just a teenager cheeks still soft, shoulders still narrow. 5 years younger. My gaze dropped to the uniform laid out neatly on the side table. Navy jacket with gold trim, pleated black skirt, white shirt pressed sharp. Arcadia Academy's silver emblem shone on the chest. Today, the first day, Arcadia Academy, where our generation trained to become knights, mages, tacticians. Where I met all of them. Jean, the sharp-tongued rogue who always saved my skin. Cecilia, my best friend, the first to die. Edwin, the one everyone called the hero. So this wasn't a dream. Somehow, I'd been sent back. I didn't know why. I didn't know how. But fate had handed me a second life. A chance to stop that future from ever happening. A chance to find the man who betrayed us and end him before he ever touched my party. A chance to save everyone. I wiped my tears, straightened my back, and picked up the uniform. This time, I said softly to my reflection, voice steadying, I'm not losing anyone. And with that promise burning in my chest, I started to get ready. I stepped into the morning sunlight, my boots crunching softly over the gravel path. The warmth on my skin felt strange, comforting, but almost unreal. I wanted to stop, to sit somewhere quiet and sort through the storm in my head, but I couldn't risk worrying my parents. And today was the first day of school. I wasn't going to miss it. It's really the same. Every corner of the city hit me like a memory come alive. The cobblestone streets, the smell of bread drifting from the bakeries, the familiar chatter of shopkeepers opening their stalls. Each detail was proof. I had truly gone back in time. By the time I reached Arcadia Academy, my chest felt tight. The academy gates towered ahead, grand and severe, exactly as I remembered. White stone spires cut into the sky. Silver banners danced in the breeze. It looked untouched by war, so different from the ruined slaughterhouse it would become one day. I took a step toward the entrance. Elysia. I froze. That voice. You're late. Again. I turned. There she was. Cecilia Evelyn, hands on her hips, cheeks puffed up in fake anger, her bag hanging from one shoulder. Bright eyes, warm smile, that quiet, stubborn strength she always carried just under the surface. She looked exactly the same. You said we'd meet 10 minutes ago, she said, walking up fast. First day, and you're already breaking promises. For a second, I could only stare. My throat tightened. My heart clenched so hard it hurt. I swallowed it down before it spilled out of me. I managed. I woke up late. Cecilia sighed like she was exhausted with me already, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Unbelievable. What am I going to do with you? Then she nudged my shoulder, light and familiar. Come on, let's go before we actually get in trouble. I nodded and followed her through the gates. I didn't cry. I didn't grab her like I wanted to, but the shock still rolled through me in waves. Cecilia was alive. She had been the first one to fall from our party. The earliest loss. The one that stayed with me the longest. When I died, I had still been with the others until the very end. We fought together, laughed together, bled together. But Cecilia, she was taken 2 years before that. Right after graduation, before the war between demons and humans even began. Her absence had been a silence that never healed. And in the end, I died the same way she did. By the same person, without ever avenging her. But now I could change everything. Thank you for giving me another chance. We moved along the academy's cobbled walkway, getting swallowed into the stream of students heading toward the entrance hall. Today was the entrance ceremony. The courtyard buzzed with fresh uniforms, excited chatter, banners snapping gently in the wind. Cecilia walked beside me, light on her feet, face glowing like she had the whole world in front of her. It felt surreal to live this day again. Back then, I was just another nervous first year, dreaming of glory, honor, and a heroic future. Now all I could see were flashes of what was coming. Battlefields soaked in blood, comrades collapsing, a traitor's laughter echoing over all. I looked around at the students near us. So many bright faces. So much hope. Half of them wouldn't live long enough to graduate. And when the war began, almost all of them would die before it ended. Unless I stopped it. The bell rang, sharp and clear. A robed faculty member stepped up onto a raised platform, voice carried by magic. Welcome, first years of Arcadia Academy. You stand at the threshold of greatness, the future heroes of humanity. Cheers burst around me. I clapped too, but my hands felt heavy, because I remembered what came next. This was where I first saw him. Edwin. My eyes swept the crowd. Right on schedule. Whispers rippled through the students. There he is. That's him, right? Edwin Leon Hart. First place in the entrance exam. He stood out without even trying, tall, composed, sunlight catching in his golden hair. Strongest of the new students. The one who broke the Academy's entrance record with the highest score ever recorded. By tradition, the faculty member continued. We will hear a few words from this year's top scorer. The courtyard quieted. With unparalleled results in both practical and written tests, and the highest score in Arcadia Academy history, your first-year representative is Edwin Leon Hart. Admiration rolled across the crowd as Edwin stepped forward. The applause was steady and respectful. To me, it sounded distant. That was the start. Back then, he was just the best student. Later, he became our leader, our hope, the hero, and in the end, the broken boy I couldn't save. Looking at him now, untouched by war, still shining under the weight of nothing but expectations, I felt a promise rise in me like a spark. You won't carry it alone this time. Edwin took the stage with effortless confidence, nodded politely, and spoke. Thank you. I'm honored to be chosen as your representative. This is the beginning for all of us. Each of you has something worth bringing to Arcadia, and I hope we can support each other and grow together. He smiled, calm and sincere. Let's make the most of our time here. Applause swelled again. I joined in, but my thoughts were already elsewhere. Where's that bastard? I searched the crowd, scanning every line of students. Front, back, side groups, anywhere. Nothing. This is strange. He should be here. I knew he was a first year like me. He never stood out. Just another quiet student in a sea of uniforms. The only reason I ever noticed him at all was because there was something off about him, something I couldn't name at the time. Even then, I thought he was normal, until he killed one of the strongest heroes and was revealed as a traitor. The ceremony ended in a flourish of magic and another ring of the bell. Still, I hadn't found him. Students began to scatter into their groups, buzzing about dorms, classes, teachers. I stayed a second longer, until a familiar voice pulled me back. You were staring pretty hard, you know. I turned. Gene Halden stood there with a lazy smirk, hands in his pockets, dark hair messy from the breeze, and trouble written all over his face. Childhood friend by circumstance, annoyance by nature. Looking at someone you like? He teased. I let out a breath, some of the tension easing. No, just someone I know. Who? None of your business. Sure. Secrets, huh? He chuckled and strolled off toward his own friends. The moment he disappeared, a sharp scolding cut through the murmur. How can you be late on the first day of school? A stern professor in deep navy-trimmed robes stood with his arms crossed, glaring down at a boy in front of him. I'm sorry, Professor, the boy said sheepishly. I overslept. My breath stopped. That voice. You better not make this a habit, the professor snapped. I'll let you off with a warning today. Next time, there will be consequences. Yes, sir. Thank you. Cecilia nudged me with a grin. Looks like somebody actually showed up late. That could have been you if you'd waited another minute. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the boy who'd just been scolded. Messy black hair, slouched posture, bag hanging off one arm. Nothing about him screamed danger. He looked painfully ordinary, the kind of student you'd forget 5 seconds after passing him. But I hadn't forgotten. Not for a single day. That was him, the one who butchered the hero party, the one who destroyed the world I'd lived through. My throat went dry. Cale Ashford.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Arg. My head hurts. What happened? I pinched my forehead as a terrible headache throbbing behind my eyes. I remembered falling asleep in my room after binge-watching some anime, but I didn't think it would lead to this kind of pain. I slowly opened my eyes despite the ache, and what I saw gave me an even bigger shock than the headache. Huh, where am I? It was definitely not my room. The bed was too firm, the ceiling too high, the scent of old wood and lavender unfamiliar. Nothing like my room. I clearly remembered that I'd gone to sleep in my own bed, and the room's design was far too unique to belong to any of my friends. Just where am I? For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring blankly. I wanted to figure out where the hell I was, but first, I had to deal with this splitting headache. I looked around from the bed and saw the room was sparsely furnished, the most noticeable items being a neatly folded uniform and a few books. There was also a study table and chair. Looks like a school dorm. That was the most logical conclusion based on what I saw. After half an hour of lying on the bed, the pain had dulled enough to be tolerable. I scrambled to my feet. Something feels different. Whether it was my sight, strength, or general awareness, my body felt strange. I looked at my hands and legs. What the hell? My hands were full of calluses, and my legs were muscled in a way I'd never seen before. Plus, I seemed to have grown at least half a meter taller or something. I quickly ran over to the mirror. The face staring back at me wasn't the one I remembered. My hair was darker, my frame leaner. Pale skin, taller build. Eyes like dull silver under the morning light. Who the hell? I pinched my cheeks to see if I was dreaming, but no, it hurt. The reflection was a stranger. It took me a few more minutes to gather my thoughts. Is this transmigration? I'd read too many novels not to recognize what had happened. I just never thought it would happen to me. And not like this. Shouldn't I be hit by a truck or something? Apparently, I transmigrated while sleeping. I looked outside. The world was different, yet it still resembled modern Earth. Looking around, I saw plenty of students wearing the same uniform as mine, which only confirmed that this really was a student dormitory. At least I wasn't in some ancient civilization with no technology. And it didn't seem to be a cultivation world either. Otherwise, I'd probably see someone flying around with a sword. From what little I'd seen, I had no idea what kind of world I'd ended up in. Maybe it was the same world, just someone else's body. First of all, let's find out more about myself. Aside from some casual clothes, all I had was a uniform and a watch. Fortunately, the school uniform had a name tag, which helped me figure out my new identity. Cale Ashford. Is this my name? Weird name, but nothing particularly special about it. Then I looked at the watch, which looked like an advanced piece of tech. I tapped the screen, and instead of just showing the time, it projected a full display, a screen hovering in midair. Wow, it looked like hologram technology, which wasn't possible on Earth, at least not from a watch. I tapped again, and the screen lit up with a soft beep, clearer and brighter than any smartwatch I'd ever seen. The sleek interface pulsed faintly before expanding into a holographic projection above my wrist. Arcadia Academy, ID Access Terminal. Tap to open student identification. I blinked. Arcadia Academy. The name sparked something in my memory, too familiar to ignore. Didn't I read a novel with such a name? I remembered one of the web novels I read featured characters who attended Arcadia Academy before setting off on a world-saving journey. The one I stayed up all winter break reading. What was the novel's name again? I thought for a second before it clicked. Savior's Dawn. A decently popular web novel set in a magical world plagued by demons, with a cast of brilliant heroes rising to confront the darkness. Still, I wasn't sure if I transmigrated into that exact novel, or even if it was the same world, I might be in the different time period as the novel took place. But one thing was clear, this smartwatch was not something from Earth. I was definitely in a different world. Still, it was fortunate that it held more info about me. I tapped again to open the student ID. The screen changed, revealing a digital ID card, complete with a profile image that, yep, definitely wasn't my old face. Student profile. Name, Cale Ashford. Age, 17. Affiliation, Arcadia Academy. Profession, swordsman. Academic rank, 134th. Dormitory, North Tower, room 304. Class, first year. I stared at the card, mind racing. With that picture, There's no denying it. I'm Cale Ashford, apparently a new student at Arcadia Academy. That much was confirmed by the student profile. Rank 134th? Doesn't sound like a great student. Being ranked so low wasn't exactly encouraging. I didn't even know how many students were in the academy, but 134th didn't sound very impressive. Not that I could complain. I wasn't exactly a top student back in my old life either. Profession? Swordsman? Huh? Yep, definitely a fantasy world. Though with this level of tech, including holograms, it was far from primitive. Is this really Savior's Dawn? Curious, but I had no way to confirm it. Hoping to learn more, I tapped another icon labeled Schedule to see what else I could find out from the watch. It showed today's date along with a bright red notification. Entrance ceremony, 9 a.m. Location, auditoriums. I glanced at the current time, 10:28 a.m. My eyes twitched. Shit, today is the entrance ceremony. I scrambled into the uniform. The fabric felt like it had been tailored to my new body. I slapped the watch back on my wrist. It chirped again, projecting a glowing map of the campus, my position blinking in real time. I was at the far end of the North Tower. The auditoriums? All the way on the other side. This is so not how I imagined my first day after transmigration. I didn't even have enough time to process what was happening, and I already had to make a run for school. I didn't particularly care about entrance ceremonies, but I knew I couldn't afford to be absent the first day of the school. If I was going to live as Cale Ashford, I had to act the part. First, I needed to learn more about this world. And right now, that meant getting to the auditorium fast. But by the time I reached the auditorium, the students were already coming out. Looks like the entrance ceremony has ended. I thought I could mingle with the crowd and avoid being noticed that I didn't attend the ceremony, but are you Cale Ashford? A teacher immediately spotted me. He had a stern appearance, his robes trimmed in deep navy blue. I knew I was in deep trouble. How can you be late on the first day of school? He asked. I wanted to answer because I didn't know there was an entrance ceremony, because I just transmigrated and I've been trying to figure out what's happening and what I'm supposed to do. Well, there was no way I could say any of that. I'm really sorry, Professor. I overslept. The most basic excuse a student could give. You better not make this a habit. The professor warned, arms crossed. I'll let you off with a warning this time, but next time, there will be consequences. Although he looked stern, he seemed like the lenient type, someone who didn't want to be too harsh. He also had a photo of me. The other teachers nearby had one too. Perhaps they were planning to search for me, thinking something might have happened. Yes, sir. Thank you. I thanked him. Whether it was for not punishing me or for the concern he showed, I wasn't sure. After that, I looked around at the crowd of students chatting and walking together. Many of them already seemed to have formed groups or knew each other. I glanced at myself and thought, this body doesn't have any friends. The evidence? No one came to get me for the entrance ceremony. If he had friends, surely someone would have knocked on his door. Even his smartwatch had a contact list that was completely empty. Like, seriously, doesn't this guy have any social life? He doesn't even have one person's number saved. Wasn't Edwin amazing? As expected of a genius. He is just on another level from us. I overheard a nearby conversation and instantly froze. Edwin. There was no way I didn't know that name. If I wasn't sure before, I am now. This world was really Savior's Dawn. And this was the very beginning of the novel, when the protagonist Edwin first enters Arcadia Academy. And I was in the same first year as him. Damn it. I might have figured out where I transmigrated, but I wasn't happy about it. Savior's Dawn wasn't some cheerful school life story. No, it was the complete opposite. And being one of Edwin's classmates, that meant I had a 99% chance of being killed before graduation. In the novel, Edwin constantly got into dangerous situations, and his classmates suffered along with him. By the time he graduated, nearly all of them were already buried 6 feet under. And me? I'd never even killed a fish before. There was no way I could survive in this kind of insane world. I might not even make it through the prologue, much less the next 5 years, when the real war begins and destruction spreads everywhere. The main characters would survive. But me? Cale Ashford. It wasn't the name of a side character either. That meant he is a complete extra, just one of Edwin's classmates who dies. There is a 99% chance that this character dies. Just why? Why was I transmigrated into this world, where extras like me get disposed of every few chapters? Should I just run away? That might be a good idea. At least I wouldn't die right away. Though even that might not save me. Once the war breaks out 3 years from now, not even leaving Arcadia would guarantee survival. What should I do? What should I do? Cale Ashford. Just as I stood frozen in confusion, contemplating my fate, I heard someone yell my name. Huh? Does this guy actually have friends? I blinked. I've been convinced this guy had no connections in the academy. Moreover, the voice was definitely that of a girl. I turned toward the sound, blinking in surprise. 2 girls stood out from the crowd, so striking that the other students around them seemed to fade into the background, like the world had dimmed just to highlight their presence. One had short, black hair, and her golden amber eyes were burning with intensity. Her soft, serious expression had sharpened into something more dangerous, furious, even. A slight frown tugged at her lips as she stormed toward me, and the way she glared could have melted steel. I instinctively straightened my back. The warm sunlight caught in her hair and eyes, casting her in a soft, golden glow, deepening the melancholic aura around her. But all I could feel at that moment was danger. Beside her stood someone who looked like she'd stepped out of a storybook. She had long, wavy platinum blonde hair, with a single braid tucked behind one ear. Her soft silver-gray eyes blinked with innocent curiosity, and a faint blush colored her pale cheeks. Delicate, doll-like, she seemed like the kind of person you'd hesitate to touch, afraid she might disappear. Was it them? I wondered if one of them had been the one to call my name. Before I could figure it out, the short-haired girl stormed right up to me, eyes practically searing through my soul. I thought that she was going to slap me in the face. Elysia, what's wrong? Do you know him? The blonde girl asked, concerned in her voice. A confused look crossed her face as her gaze shifted back and forth between her friend and me. It was confirmed that the one who yelled his name was the one giving him the death glare. Did I do something? Wait, Elysia. Elysia. I immediately recognized the name. The main heroine of Savior's Dawn. The one destined to save the world alongside Edwin. The description matched her perfectly. Then, she must be Cecilia, the soft-spoken girl beside her. She looked exactly like I'd imagined when I read the novel. No, even more beautiful. There was no mistaking it now. These two were main characters. Cale Ashford. He was really here. I could barely believe it when I spotted him just outside the auditorium doors, looking completely clueless as students spilled out around him. Cale Ashford. Even just saying his name sent a jolt down my spine. Memories I shouldn't have returned to me in flashes I didn't ask for. The sun was warm, the chatter was lively, and yet all I could feel was the weight of my glare pressing down on him. How dare he? After everything. I clenched my fists by my sides as Cecilia looked at me, eyes full of confusion. Elysia, what's wrong? Do you know him? I heard her voice, but my focus was locked on him. His awkward expression, the way he scratched the back of his neck, the little nervous twitch in his step, like he couldn't decide whether to bolt or stay still. He looked so ordinary, so weak, completely different from what I remembered. The way he had smiled while the world burned. The eyes that watched as my friends died one after another. The laughter, that ruthlessness. Perhaps this was my chance to kill him and save the world. I took a breath. Calm down. Although I had the chance to take revenge, it might not be as easy as it sounded. He might be acting, after all. It wasn't until he killed one of the strongest heroes that people began to realize that Cale Ashford was hiding his strength. He looked weak, but it might just be a trick. And I wasn't powerful either. If I failed now and he became alert, then this regression would be for naught. If I were to make a move, it should be when I was certain. Certain that I could take Cale Ashford's life. I don't know him, I muttered. Cecilia tilted her head. Really? You seem kind of... Forget it. My voice came out sharper than I intended. She flinched a little, but I couldn't help it. How was I supposed to stay calm? I also knew that I couldn't let Cecilia near this monster. Cale Ashford just stared at me in confusion. If it weren't for my memories, I would have thought that he was some kind of naive student like her. Oomph. Cale Ashford, consider yourself lucky. I dragged Cecilia away and went to a somewhat secluded place. Elysia, what's wrong? You've been acting weird since this morning, Cecilia said worriedly. Cecilia, you must remember what I say, I said seriously as I looked into Cecilia's eyes. Cecilia nodded, although confused. I knew I was acting out of character, but this was important. You remember that boy, right? I asked. The one you called out? Cecilia asked. I nodded. Remember to stay away from him, I said. Why? Cecilia immediately asked. Well, that was reasonable. Cale Ashford had yet to do anything, but I knew the future. I can't tell you for now, but please believe me. He's someone you shouldn't associate with. I knew it was a lot to ask, especially to a kind girl like Cecilia, who always tried to get along with everyone. But I had to make sure that this time, she didn't get killed. Cecilia didn't say anything and fell in a deep thought. After some time, she nodded and agreed. All right, if you're saying this, there must be a good reason, Cecilia said with a smile. I was relieved. Although Cecilia was kind, she was also stubborn and didn't change her mind easily. I thought that she wouldn't agree, but she did. After Cecilia agreed, a small weight lifted from my shoulders. At the very least, I'd prevented her from getting too close to him, for now. Even if she didn't fully understand, she trusted me. And for that, I was grateful. We made our way toward the classroom where we would have our first class. The room was buzzing with energy, students chattering, exchanging introductions, comparing entrance rankings. Arcadia Academy, where the brightest students of the continent trained, was never short on brilliance. But even among the brilliant, there were stars that shone brighter than the rest. And one of them had already taken center stage. As soon as we stepped into the class, it was impossible not to notice the group forming in the middle of the room. Or more specifically, the boy at the heart of it all, Edwin Leon Hart, tall, poised, and effortlessly commanding attention with just his presence. A small smile played on his lips as he responded to the flood of greetings from students. You're amazing, Edwin. I heard you scored a perfect in both magic and swordsmanship. Edwin, how do you usually train? The voices came from every direction, but he took it all in stride. Unfazed, calm, extraordinarily mature for his age. A few glances turned in our direction as Cecilia and I walked in, and soon a ripple of murmurs followed. There's Elysia, and Cecilia too. They're both in the top 5. Elysia von Arctria, second place overall. They say that if not for Edwin, her marks might be considered the highest in the history of Arcadia Academy. Cecilia of House Elvereth, right? She's supposed to be a prodigy in healing arts. They're both so pretty too. How unfair. I sighed. This kind of attention was annoying. Cecilia chuckled beside me. We didn't even need to approach anyone. A few students were already heading toward us. Some came out of genuine admiration. Others were just trying to curry favor. It was a feeling I'd experienced countless times before, even back when the hero party was formed and I was appointed as vice captain. Before I could mentally brace myself, Jean Phelan made his entrance, loud and dramatic as ever. He practically burst into the room like he owned it. Yo, move aside, peasants. The real number 3 is here. Stupid, arrogant little show-off. I cursed. He had always been like this, which made others pretty annoyed at his attitude. Cecilia giggled. He's not wrong, though. I hate that he's actually talented. I muttered, though I also pitied him when I remembered how his life ended along with mine. Jean grinned the moment he spotted us and jogged over. Elysia, Cecilia, you are here. Did you really have to announce yourself like that? I asked dryly. Of course. You gotta make a strong first impression. Despite his theatrics, Jean was a reliable fighter, and truthfully, someone I didn't mind having around. He might have been a bit much at times, but his heart was in the right place. At least better than someone who would betray humanity. As the room buzzed with chatter and competition, I took one last glance across the crowd, only to see him again. Cale Ashford. He stood awkwardly near the back, far from the attention. No one approached him. No one even acknowledged him. He looked out of place. Keep acting. This time it won't go your way. When I finally stepped into the classroom, almost all the students had already arrived. I'd hoped to slip in quietly, sit at the back, and figure out how to survive in a school designed for future war heroes. Although I knew what would happen in the future, it wasn't exactly guaranteed that it would unfold the same way, especially now that I was here. Moreover, there was no way I was going to just sit quietly and let the story play out as normal. After all, if that happened, 90% of these students would die, with a high chance of me being one of them. Perhaps I was one of those extra characters who died in the first year. Considering I hadn't heard the name Cale Ashford even once in the novel, that was a pretty solid possibility. In any case, Cale Ashford was definitely an extra meant to die sooner or later, and I had to do everything I could to prevent that. The moment I walked in, the noise didn't stop. A few heads turned toward me, but they quickly lost interest. Just a nobody. Students had already formed their groups, and I knew I'd missed the ideal window to make friends. Well, I didn't think too much about it. Maybe it was even better this way. No one would suspect anything strange about me possessing Cale Ashford, though that also meant it'd be harder to gather information about myself. Still, it was already obvious who was popular and who wasn't, just based on the clusters of people around certain individuals. One person stood out more than anyone. The main hero, Edwin Leonhardt, just like in the novel's prologue. Tall, sharp, regal without even trying. His golden hair looked like it belonged in a shampoo commercial, and his uniform was tailored so perfectly it had to be enchanted. And of course, he had the aura of someone who'd just walked out of legend. Not to mention the group of students already orbiting around him like moons caught in his gravity. Damn, is he an idol? It was surreal seeing him in person, like a movie character stepping into real life. Except in this movie, I was the background extra who gets stabbed by goblins in the first 30 minutes. He was everything the book described, and more. Effortlessly charismatic, confident without being cocky, the kind of guy who made the world believe he deserved to be its savior. And he wasn't the only one glowing. I scanned the room and found Elysia and Cecilia sitting near the front. Elysia looked a little off from how she was described in the novel. She gave off this tense, dangerous aura, not the bright, noble charm I'd expected. But then again, not everything described in a book had to match reality. And maybe she was just having a rough morning? Cecilia, on the other hand, gave me a small, polite smile when she noticed me. That smile could cure diseases. She was every bit the gentle, kind soul the novel described. More like a saintess than the actual saintess. Beside them was Gene Halden, full of energy, wearing a cocky grin like he was born to be a shouting protagonist. Of course, that role had already been filled by Edwin Leonhardt, the actual protagonist of Savior's Dawn. Still, they were all here, some of the most important characters in the story. The ones guaranteed to survive no matter what hell the world threw at them. And here I was, Cale Ashford, a guy who'd go unnoticed by readers even if my name was mentioned. Oh, he died? Anyway, who was he? That kind of character. Well, no point getting upset about being transmigrated as an extra. The main characters didn't exactly have easy lives either. Constant threats, constant battles, near-death experiences, the kind of stress that could turn anyone into a caffeine addict. Thud, thud. I made my way to the farthest, most out-of-the-way seat I could find by the window, of course. The classic loner spot. I set my bag down and collapsed into the chair, resisting the urge to groan. This really is the start of the novel. All the key characters were present. Edwin, Elysia, Cecilia, Jean, future legends in the making. Each one bursting with talents that broke the rules of common sense. Each one vital to saving the world. And then there was me, a guy who didn't even exist in the story. A complete extra. A nobody. A death flag, just waiting to be triggered. I need a plan. Just surviving the school year would be a miracle, let alone lasting all 5 years. Because sooner or later, this class of prodigies would be tossed into hell. And I'd read every arc of that hell. Monster attacks, betrayals, political conspiracies, endless casualties. This academy wasn't a school. It was a survival game with bonus lectures. If I wanted to live, I needed to avoid the main cast as much as possible. Especially Edwin. That guy attracted disaster like it was a part-time job. Even standing near him could mean getting caught in a magical explosion or cursed by some ancient relic. Sure, he would survive, but the same couldn't be said for everyone around him. If you weren't a main character, it was better to avoid Edwin entirely, because you wouldn't even know what killed you. And Elysia? Forget it. The look she gave me earlier was enough to confirm one thing. She hated me. Which was weird. Elysia wasn't the type to hate people for no reason. Maybe she found Jean annoying, sure, but she was generally kind to her classmates. So what was her problem with me? Did I do something in the past that upset her? I had no way of knowing. I didn't inherit Cale Ashford's memories. But one thing was certain, I must have had some kind of encounter with Elysia. And it definitely wasn't a good one. While I was still lost in thought, somewhere between spiraling into existential dread and figuring out how not to die in year one, the classroom door slid open with a soft click. The atmosphere changed instantly. No, seriously, I wasn't imagining it. The chatter died down. A few students straightened in their seats. Some even looked like they were holding their breath. I turned my head. There she was, perhaps a goddess? Her long silver hair flowed like silk, tied loosely with a thin silver ribbon. Her figure was accentuated perfectly by a fitted academy coat, and her heels clicked softly against the floor with every step. Violet eyes scanned the room, cool and unreadable. There was no mistaking it. Every eye in the class was on her, including Edwin. Wait, am I dreaming? One of the students whispered. No way. That's Sylvia Merrill, isn't it? Huh? You mean Sylvia Merrill? The ice goddess. She's ranked 71st in the global hero rankings. And she's our homeroom teacher. What kind of insane luck is that? Insane luck? Don't you know how strict she is rumored to be? She's so much prettier in person. You can say that again. They weren't exaggerating. Even I, who knew who she was from the novel, found myself staring for a second too long. She's more stunning than the book described. Where Cecilia and Elysia were like flowers still blooming, Sylvia Merrill was the peak of that bloom, radiant, refined, and untouchable. She walked to the front and turned to face us, eyes cold and razor-sharp. Good morning, she said, her voice smooth as polished ice. I'm your homeroom teacher. Another wave of disbelief rolled through the room. No way, man. We're so screwed. If she's our teacher, then the passing rate is going to be hellish. Many knew about Slivia's reputation of not being lenient to her students, and many suffered under her teaching, though there were others who thought it was good. At least, we got the prettiest girl in the world to be our homeroom teacher, right? Ignoring the murmurs, she tapped on the crystal embedded in her teacher's desk, activating a faintly glowing barrier that silenced the room in an instant. I am Sylvia Merrill, ranked 71st heroes according to the Heroic Council. The classroom buzzed with hushed reactions. This academy doesn't care about your bloodline or background. Your worth will be judged by your skills and hard work. Her violet gaze swept across the classroom, pausing only for a heartbeat on each student. It felt like she was memorizing our faces. There are 150 students in this class. You're the highest-ranked first-year batch ever. That makes this the most important class in the Academy's history. The survival of nations will one day rest on your shoulders. When I heard that there were 150 students, I was relieved, thinking that at least I wasn't the worst person here. There were still 13 students who were ranked lower than me and were weaker than me. Or were they? If I were to fight them right, I would undoubtedly lose. I don't even know how to swing a sword. How the hell could I fight with these people who have been training since they were kids? No matter how much of an extra Cale Ashford was, or how much I believed he was 100 times better than someone like me, who couldn't even cut a chicken. You'll be introduced to your core subjects this week. Combat theory, elemental manipulation, monster ecology, artifact utilization. Learn quickly, or you'll be left behind. She clapped once, and a glowing list of names floated behind her, aligned in unmistakable order. Ranking. Now, introductions. We'll go by rank. State your name, your specialty, and what you want out of this academy. Her eyes swept through the room and unmistakably paused on Edwin Leon Hart. Let's begin. Edwin stood smoothly. No nerves. No hesitation. I am Edwin Leon Hart, he said, voice calm and noble. Swords are my main weapon. My goal is to become the shield that protects the world. If it came from the mouth of someone else, it might have sounded cocky, but not when it came from Edwin Leon Hart. He looked and felt like the epitome of a hero who might actually save humanity. Clap, clap. Applause immediately followed, students showering him with admiration for his noble goal. Sylvia gave him a slight nod. Next, Elysia stood, posture perfect. Elysia von Arctria. My speciality is swordsmanship and magic. I'm here to make sure that someone doesn't destroy the world again. She didn't glance at anyone, but I could feel the subtle pressure in the air around her. She was already different from how she'd been described in the novel. And isn't her goal different from what's written in the novel? It had changed from becoming strong enough to protect others to making sure no one destroys the world again. Was it the same meaning, just worded differently? It should be. Even her friend Cecilia was looking at Elysia in confusion. Other students didn't know how to respond to her statement, though they gave polite applause anyway. Next, Sylvia didn't seem to care. Or perhaps she interpreted Elysia's goal as a reference to the Demon King. After all, he's the one who poses the threat to destroy the world. My name is Gene Halden. I'm going to become the greatest spear user in the world and defeat all demons. A bold declaration with a clear goal, just as expected from Gene Halden. Applause rang out, with his friend clapping harder than anyone. Gene looked proud of himself as he fingered his nose and sat down. Cecilia rose gracefully next. Hello, I'm Cecilia Elvereth. Holy magic and healing. I want to help people who need me. Short, sweet, and sincere. She was just like the novel described, too good for this cruel world. The process continued. One after another, students introduced themselves. From noble houses, prestigious bloodlines, famed families. And the longer it went on, the more I could feel my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming. Rank 136, Talia Winmere. The girl in the far corner stood timidly. Beast taming and sensory enhancement, she muttered. Then came my turn. A beat of silence. Some students turned, clearly wondering who the hell that was. Right? That was me. I forced myself to stand, fighting off the sinking feeling in my gut. Cale Ashford, I said, try not to sound like I was choking. Swordsmanship. My goal is survive. That's all I want. To survive. Not knowing what to say, I blurted out my honest thought. There was a short silence. Someone coughed, barely holding back a laugh. After all, this was a hero school, where people dreamed of saving the world, not themselves. Especially students young and full of ambition, who hadn't yet realized the dangers lying in wait for their so-called dreams. A goal like survival? It was almost taboo. No applause. No nods. Just an awkward pause before Sylvia spoke again. Understood. She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Perhaps she was also looking down on me for such a goal? Well, so what? 90% of these students would die. Survival could be considered a noble goal. Not that they'd understand me anyway. Then the last 13 students gave their introductions, each one filled with idealism and the desire to help others despite their low ranks. That concludes introductions. Today, we'll have light exercise. Everyone, follow me. The hallway outside the classroom buzzed with nervous energy as Sylvia led them through the academy's pristine corridors. Students were excitedly talking to each other, some ready to show off their muscles, while others who hated exercise weren't exactly brimming with enthusiasm. They arrived at their destination within minutes, and the sight alone knocked the wind out of Cale Ashford. It was massive. The so-called training field was a coliseum-sized open space covered in enchanted turf, marked with lanes like a stadium track, surrounded by arcane walls and practice zones. You could probably fit 3 football fields in here and still have room for a dragon or 2. Welcome to Ground Zero, Sylvia said, her heels clicking to a halt at the edge of the track. This will be your morning training field for the rest of the semester. Some students gawked. Others already looked like they were regretting their life choices. Sylvia turned toward us, expression unreadable. For today's physical training, she began, voice cool and sharp, you will run. That is all. Relieved sighs rippled across the group. Running didn't sound so bad, right? Sylvia raised one hand and promptly shattered all that naive optimism. 100 laps. Silence. Not just stunned silence, soul-leaving body silence. "Excuse me," someone squeaked. 100 laps around this field," Sylvia repeated with perfect calm. "Before the period ends. Those who fail will complete an additional 50 laps after class." "No way," a student muttered in disbelief. "She's joking, right? Do I look like I'm joking?" Sylvia asked, her gaze sweeping through the crowd like a blade. No, she really didn't. "Do mages also need to run?" asked one student, skinny and clearly not built for this kind of activity. She didn't look like she could run 10 laps, much less 100. Sylvia gave her a sharp look that immediately shut her down. "Do you think your enemies will spare you just because you are a mage?" "No. Precisely because you are a mage, you must know how to retreat quickly." Sylvia explained briefly. "Can we use magic to strengthen our bodies?" Another student asked. "It's acceptable," Sylvia said. What she wanted students to learn and practice was running while also increasing their stamina. Running away from enemies was more common than most students thought. Though it might sound cowardly, it was foolish to fight opponents you couldn't beat. Sylvia believed that the ability to retreat was critical, especially when you were weak. Moreover, when going on campaigns against demons or exploring unknown areas, having good stamina was crucial. A single person could drag down an entire team just because they lacked proper endurance. As the Hero Academy, it was their duty to train students and prepare them for their future endeavors, though Sylvia often went overboard with her training methods. Mages sighed in relief. Without any body enhancement, they couldn't even dream of running 10 laps, let alone 100. Though even with body enhancement, there was no way most of them could complete 100 laps. Their mana would run out in 10 minutes on average, and even the mages with insane capacity couldn't last more than 30 minutes of continuous body enhancement. But still better than being not able to use their magic. No more questions? The students looked confused but remained silent. No one dared to raise another hand. "You have 2 hours. Begin." There was no whistle, no countdown, no mercy. Whoosh. The first students broke into motion. Edwin, of course, leading the charge like he was born to sprint across oversized battlefields. Elysia followed, her strides composed and calculated, as if even her jogging had grace. "Why do I have to go through this again?" Elysia thought grimly. In her first life, Sylvia had made them go through the same thing, but she had forgotten about it until now. She couldn't deny that this harsh training had helped her a lot in the future, but she still couldn't help but complain, especially now that her body was back to how it had been before all that intense training. She gritted her teeth, going through this hell for the second time. Her eyes drifted to Cale Ashford, who was still standing at the starting line, dumbfounded. If she wanted to surpass Cale Ashford, she needed to strengthen her body and grow stronger, faster than before. Jean launched forward with so much force he nearly tripped over himself, while Cecilia moved at a steady pace, conserving energy. And then there was Cale Ashford. He looked at the main characters who had already begun running. Compared to others, their judgment and decision-making were clearly higher. Since 2 hours was the time limit, they didn't waste time being confused. They simply started running. Honestly, Cale didn't think it was even necessary to panic for the main characters, especially Edwin Leon Hart. According to the novel, Edwin's physical strength was absurd. He'd probably finish the 100 laps in under an hour. 2 hours was generous for him. Others began moving as well. Cale started jogging. He still wasn't used to Cale Ashford's body and had no idea whether he even had the stamina to complete 100 laps. Judging by his class rank, he at least knew their former Cale Osford wasn't anything special, and his body didn't feel particularly powerful either. So instead of burning through his stamina like some others, who would sprint and then crash within 30 minutes, as happened to many students in the novel, Cale decided to go at his own pace. In the blink of an eye, he was already at the back of the group, still jogging steadily, refusing to treat it like a competition. By lap 3, Edwin Leon Hart had already caught up to him and, without even sparing a glance, overtook him effortlessly. Cale just watched the protagonist of the novel pass him, nodding slightly. He really does look like the hero of humanity. Then came Elysia, her unmistakable glare landing squarely on him. He still didn't understand why Elysia acted that way toward him, perhaps blaming his predecessor, the original Cale Ashford, for some past offense. Jean Halden also passed him too, with Cecilia being the last. She gave him a small nod as she went by. Such an angel, Cale thought. She was the only one who acknowledged his existence, at least with a goodwill. Then other student one began to overtake him one by one. Everyone else looked down on him. He was dead last, even being lapped by students by the third round. But Cale didn't spare them much thought. He didn't have the luxury to. He still had to figure out his own limits and exactly how strong or weak this body really was. Professor Sylvia stood at the edge of the track, arms crossed, heels planted firmly against the stone floor as the sound of footfalls filled the massive field. Her sharp eyes swept across the wave of students circling the training ground, their movements ranging from frantic to focused. She watched Edwin Leonhard at the front, his pace consistent, form powerful and efficient. Despite knowing body enhancement magic, he had yet to use any of it and seemed to treat this as nothing more than normal training, unlike the other students. Even after 5 laps, he hadn't slowed. His muscles were coiled and unrelenting. A small, rare nod of satisfaction touched Sylvia's lips. As expected from the person that the heroic council has high expectations for. She murmured to herself. Not far behind, Elysia moved like a seasoned knight, graceful, precise, and controlled. Though clearly struggling more than Edwin, there was rhythm in her breath, like that of a veteran warrior, not something you'd expect from a new student. Jean Halden, too, was chasing after Edwin and Elysia. Although reckless and burning through his stamina too quickly, he was managing to keep pace for now. Sylvia didn't expect so many promising first years beyond Edwin. Perhaps this truly marked the rise of a new era, or at least that's what people had been saying since the emergence of so many talented youths. Compared to the last batch she had trained, this group showed far more potential, but whether they could grow into the saviors of humanity remained to be seen. Even the mages, pale and sweating, pushed their limits with trembling legs and flickering mana enhancements. Yes, this class was promising, but then her eyes landed on someone who clearly didn't match the rest. Cale Ashford, jogging, still at the rear. His form wasn't terrible, but there was no urgency in his movements, no fire, no visible effort to strategize or pace himself effectively. Just a steady jog, like he was on a morning stroll instead of enduring one of Sylvia's infamous trials. Her brow twitched. Tapping her smartwatch, a hollow interface flickered to life on her wrist. A screen popped up displaying Cale Ashford's profile. Cale Ashford, rank 137, physical aptitude, below average magic potential, unremarkable mana capacity, average combat evaluation, underwhelming. Sylvia exhaled through her nose. No wonder. It wasn't even a matter of poor conditioning. The numbers didn't lie. He was weak. His physical stats alone explained his lagging performance. Still, her gaze lingered on him with a slight edge. He's not even counting the distance. Doesn't even seem aware of how far behind he already is. Her eyes flicked to the lap tracker above the field. Cale had just completed his 5th lap. With only 2 hours in total, he was far off the pace. At this rate, he'd be lucky to hit 50 laps before time ran out. Sylvia's expression flattened, disappointed. It's one thing to be weak, she muttered, eyes hardening, but giving up before even hitting your limits? Her voice was quiet, but the judgment in her tone was sharp as a blade. She lowered her wrist and watched him for a moment longer, then turned her attention back to the frontrunners. Her students were sweating, stumbling, pushing past pain and pride to run, and yet the one who should be trying the hardest moved with the least urgency. Her jaw tightened. Maybe he needed a different kind of push. Maybe she'd personally make sure Cale Ashford understood the meaning of effort before this semester was over. She assumed he wasn't taking her seriously. Perhaps he thought she was joking when she said there'd be 50 extra laps for anyone who failed. Either way, she had no intention of intervening now. She would speak with him after class. 30 minutes later, students were dropping left and right, especially the mages. Their mana was drained. Without it, they couldn't enhance their bodies any further. Without their buffs, they quickly exhausted their stamina, making it difficult to run. Most of them had only finished 30 laps, which already seemed to be their limit. Even the swordsmen were out of breath, gasping, their legs growing heavier by the second. For many, completing 100 laps within 2 hours was beginning to look impossible. Professor Sylvia must be joking. Who the hell could finish 100 laps in 2 hours? There's just no way. We are merely students. There is no way that we can complete this task. Despite their complaints, deep down, they knew it wasn't impossible, at least for one particular person. Edwin Leonhardt had already surpassed 50 laps, his speed and stamina holding steady. Even Elysia was keeping up with him, though she was visibly tired, occasionally casting buffs to replenish her stamina. Jean Halden couldn't keep up with the two monsters, but had still completed 45 laps, pushing onward behind them. Surprisingly, Cecilia, supposedly just a healer with a delicate build, was fourth with 40 laps completed. She had clearly been training hard, using healing magic mid-run to restore stamina as needed. On the other hand, the lowest lap count belonged, unsurprisingly, to Cale Ashford. He had completed only around 20 laps, but he was still going. Not that anyone was impressed. Cale had been jogging from the start, never truly running like the rest. Even if he could keep going for another hour and a half, there was no way he'd complete 100 laps at this pace. 1 hour later, Edwin was on the verge of finishing his 100th lap, far ahead of the others. Elysia was at her 90th, trailing behind by 10 laps. Damn it, Elysia grit her teeth. Just like in her first life, Edwin had completely outpaced her in the first training session. Still, the gap had closed. It had been a 20-lap difference before, now only 10. Thanks to her experience, she had better stamina management and knew exactly when to cast buffs. But experience could only go so far. The biggest difference was still physical ability. And Edwin, that monster wasn't even using magic. Once again, she was reminded just how monstrous Edwin Leonhardt really was. And yet, even he had fallen to Cale Ashford's hand in her previous life. Jean Halden had slowed considerably after the 45th minute and had only managed 70 laps so far. The huge gap between him and Edwin had clearly hurt his pride. Cecilia didn't seem to care much about rankings, but she had completed 65 laps with calm determination. Aside from those four, it was clear that no one else had any hope of finishing all 100 laps. Most of the remaining students were stuck below 50 laps, and their stamina had bottomed out. If they couldn't complete 50 laps with full stamina, there was no way they'd do another 50 laps with their stamina exhausted. Several had already collapsed, especially those with fewer than 35 laps, having accepted Sylvia's punishment as inevitable. But even now, the one student at the very bottom of the ranks was still running. Cale Ashford had just completed his 40th lap and showed no sign of giving up. The one everyone dismissed as being unable to complete even 50 laps had already run 40 and was still going, while others, who expected to outperform him, had already given up before reaching that mark. Still, not many found it admirable. He was running at a slow pace, and most believed he wouldn't reach the 100th lap no matter what. But Cale Ashford didn't care about any of that. He was focused entirely on his physical body. He had no clue how to use mana or skills, so he relied purely on his physical endurance. At first, he was genuinely impressed by how far he could run without feeling exhausted. He picked up his pace slowly, and until the 20th lap, he didn't even feel that tired. Back on Earth, he would have collapsed by the 3rd lap. At the very least, there is some perk to this transmigration. He thought, feeling blessed to have such a strong body, though it should be normal in this world. By the 25th lap, he had already overtaken his first fellow student who had given up and collapsed. He kept running until the 40th lap. By then, most had already dropped out. Was it because he hadn't hit his limit? No, he had hit his limit. But there was one reason he couldn't stop. I have to survive. To survive, he had to get stronger, and this was step one. He was still confused about this abrupt transmigration. It felt like a dream, but he had no choice but to accept it as reality. With no way to return, survival became his only goal. And to survive, he needed strength. He wasn't thinking about reaching 100 laps like the others. He was focused only on what he could do to grow stronger. One thing was certain. He had to survive Sylvia's hellish training. According to the novel, this was one of the most effective methods for building physical strength, and he would like to believe that it would help him. By the 50th lap, sweat poured down from his face like rain. He felt like he was already far past the limits of Cale Ashford's body. His lungs were on fire. His legs betrayed him with every step. He was pretty sure even his hair hurt. Is this what hell feels like? But he still had no intention of giving up. Students who had already collapsed looked at him like he was a fool, desperately chasing something he wasn't capable of reaching. Still, there were some who admired him for his persistence. By then, Elysia had finished her 100 laps. 1 hour and 9 minutes, Sylvia announced. Elysia simply nodded. 20 minutes faster than before. She exhaled, eyes immediately turning to Edwin, who didn't even look like he'd broken a sweat. Still a long way to go. In her first life, she had always aimed to surpass Edwin, even if it remained only a dream. But now, it wasn't just a goal, it was a necessity. If she couldn't even beat Edwin, how could she defeat someone who had single-handedly taken him and an elite party down? Cale Ashford. She muttered as her gaze landed on someone still struggling on the training ground. She remembered this scene well from her previous life. Cale Ashford, looked down on by everyone, had reached 70 laps by the end of 2 hours. In her previous life, Elysia had praised him for his persistence and scolded the others who looked down on his hard work. But this time, she began to doubt. Was he just pretending to be weak all this time? Considering how powerful he had become when he betrayed humanity and fought against her party, she was certain that this kind of training should have been effortless for him, just like it was for Edwin. So was he faking it? Or was he truly this weak at this point in time? She didn't know. If she did, she wouldn't hesitate to act. But on the small chance that he was only pretending, any rash move could shift future events beyond her control. What if he killed her? Then her regression to the past would be meaningless. So, she decided to bide her time, to fully understand him, and to uncover the weaknesses of the man known as Cale Ashford. Sylvia remained silent on the sidelines, her ice-cold gaze watching every one of them. Not shouting, not encouraging, just observing, judging. Each time Cale passed her, he felt like she could see right through him. Do I look that pathetic? He thought. Probably. But whether he looked pathetic or not, he didn't care. He just wants to become stronger and survive until the protagonist party kills the Demon King and saves the world. He pushed himself through lap after miserable lap, each one worse than the last. Eventually, he stopped counting. He just kept going. At last, the period ended. Sylvia raised her hand, and glowing numbers floated above each student, red or blue. He saw his 73, red. He had failed. He wasn't too disappointed since he never expected to pass it in his first time. Moreover, from this class, only 24 students have managed to pass. So, there was no need to feel down at all. Sylvia's voice sliced through the wheezing and groans like an Arctic wind. Those who failed to complete the required 100 laps, congratulations. You now owe me the remaining laps, plus 50 more. What? Weren't we only supposed to do 50 as a penalty? Shock rippled through the crowd as they realized they had to make up their missed laps and add 50 on top of that. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? Think you can give up and then only run 50 laps later? Sylvia glared at the students who has already given up halfway. You have to finish all 100 laps, no matter what. If you don't complete them now, you'll just have to do them later. And if you can't finish them now, 50 more laps will be added along with your remaining laps. A collective groan followed, but no one dared to argue with Sylvia, even if they wanted to. With her usual poise and total disregard for their broken bodies, she turned and walked away. I think I'm going to puke. Already did. Another groaned. Cale just lay there, staring at the sky, legs numb and chest burning. Year one is going to kill me. The next class was about to begin, and there was no rest, not even for the half-dead. They had to go to their next class in this condition. Do you need healing magic? Cale turned his head toward the voice. It was Cecilia. Of course, it had to be an angel. He nodded weakly. Cecilia began casting, light flowing gently over his body. He felt warmth, like water after a long drought. So this is what healing feels like. It was almost addictive. Feeling better? Cecilia asked softly. Yeah, thanks. Then Elysia stormed in, eyes sharp with disapproval. Come here. She grabbed Cecilia's arm, dragging her away. Cecilia gave him a small wave as she was pulled back, and Cale returned it, dazed. What did Cale Ashford even do to make Elysia break character like that? Should I apologize or something? He didn't know what his predecessor had done, but he felt like he should at least try to fix whatever it was. After all, Elysia was the main heroine of this world and somebody he would want to be close with for survival. What were you thinking? She hissed, her voice low but intense. I told you never to associate with that guy, didn't I? Cecilia blinked at Elysia, taken aback by the intensity in her voice. Elysia had never gotten this angry with her before, no matter what she did. But you looked like he needed help, she replied, her voice soft but firm. Alicia's grip tightened on her arm. I warned you for a reason, she said sharply. Cale Ashford is a very dangerous individual. Elysia said this while trembling slightly. She clearly remembered his cruelty and ruthlessness, because to her, it was just yesterday that he had done all those horrible things to her and the others. One of the reasons she hadn't killed Cale Ashford yet might also be the deep, lingering fear she still felt toward him. Cecilia stared at her friend, surprised by the reaction shown by Elysia. You're afraid of him? She asked, her voice laced with confusion and concern. Elysia flinched, but didn't deny it. I'm not sure what he's hiding, but if there's even a chance he's the same person I remember, then yes, I am. Cecilia looked back toward the training field, where Cale still lay sprawled on the ground, blinking up at the sky like someone just grateful to be alive. Then she looked back at Elysia, who genuinely feared that same person. It was already rare for Elysia to show weakness, not to mention admit it like this. He didn't seem dangerous to me. She murmured. That's what makes him dangerous, Elysia said quietly. You don't see it until it's too late. A long silence settled between them. It seemed Elysia was serious, perhaps more serious than she had ever been. Cecilia had no choice but to fold under her pressure. Okay, I won't approach him. Cecilia could only comply. You must promise me this time. Earlier, I warned you, but you ignored it. Okay, I promise to stay away from Cale Ashford. Elysia was a bit relieved. She knew Cecilia wasn't someone who broke her promises easily. She thought she could prevent Cecilia from associating with Cale Ashford. But with Cecilia's personality, and Cale looking so pitiful, it was nearly impossible for her to turn away. Wait. Then, a dangerous thought crossed Alicia's mind. Is Cale Ashford pretending for Cecilia, so that she'll let her guard down and he can take advantage of it? That would explain why Cale Ashford, who should be powerful, was acting so pathetically, like he couldn't even finish 100 laps. As expected of such an evil person, his schemes run deeper than I could have ever imagined. Elysia believed this with absolute certainty, because that was the kind of person Cale Ashford had been. At the moment, the one Elysia thought was scheming didn't even have the energy to properly lift his head. Still, he was back in class and was either ready or had no choice but to continue. Unless you were dead or nearly dead, there was no way to avoid taking classes. And if you deliberately try to skip one, let's just say the punishment was worse than running 100 laps around the training ground. Cale Ashford knew about this from the novel, where a few students had tried to skip class. Cale dragged himself into the classroom, limbs still aching, and collapsed onto a seat in the back corner. His vision blurred at the edges, but he tried to stay upright. He wasn't alone. Most students looked like they had just crawled out of the afterlife. Only a few, Elysia, Edwin, and a couple of others, appeared without any fatigue. Can I survive 3 years here? Cale Ashford muttered. A few moments later, the door creaked open. An old man walked in, cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. He wore long gray robes, frayed at the edges, and a simple brown sash. His beard, white and wispy, reached his chest, and his back was slightly hunched with age. His eyes, pale and sharp, swept across the room slowly. "Good morning," the old man greeted, voice low and gravelly, yet clear enough to carry through the room. Everyone seemed to have done a good warm-up with Mrs. Sylvia. Cale Ashford couldn't tell whether the old man was serious or making a joke. That warm-up had nearly killed him and several others, and he dared to call it just a warm-up? The man walked to the center, where a simple pedestal stood, and tapped it once with his cane. "It seems some of the seats are empty. Well, I hope they aren't skipping the class." The old man muttered with a wicked smile. "Anyways, I am Orwin," he said. "I will be teaching you everything regarding mana and how to properly utilize it." Cale Ashford tried to pay attention, despite the burning pain in his legs. After all, in this world, what he was most unfamiliar with is mana, which is essentially for everything here. "I don't expect you to remember my name," the old man added, "but you will remember what I teach, assuming you survive long enough." He tapped the pedestal again. This time, a glowing diagram formed in the air above it, a silhouette of a human body with glowing blue lines branching through it like veins. "The basics of mana should already be known to you," Orwin continued. "It is the lifeblood of every mage, knight, and being capable of wielding power in this world." He paused, scanning the students. "However, knowing it and understanding it are very different things. So today, we will reiterate the basics, not because you are ignorant, but because even the wise forget what is simple." The diagram expanded. Veins became channels, and nodes appeared at the joints and along the spine. "This," Orwin said, pointing at the glowing image, "is the mana circuit, your internal pathway for mana flow. It connects your core to every part of your body. If this is damaged, you're crippled. If it's blocked, you're weak. If it's broken, well, I hope you've written a will." A couple of students swallowed audibly. Cale stared at the diagram. The only saving grace was that Mr. Orwin was teaching from the very basics, something even Cale could begin to grasp. Still, he had no knowledge of how this body worked, no idea how to sense, move, or control mana. Orwin's voice brought him back to the present. "Today, we begin with sensation. By now, you should already know how to circulate your mana, but it's crucial to learn how to do it efficiently." He turned back to them, his gaze sweeping over every face. "Now, close your eyes. Feel the core. It is not in your head. It is not in your limbs. It lies deep, just beneath your navel. The dantian, for those of you from the East. The heart core for others. But here we call it the source." Cale followed along awkwardly, sitting cross-legged. "Feel mana? That's easier said than done." Still, he closed his eyes, and tried, and nothing. Just darkness and the dull ache in his body. But somewhere deep within that stillness, there was a flicker, like the faintest breath of wind, moving through his gut. Was it his imagination? Or had he really felt something? Elysia let out a slow breath, her eyes already closed, posture relaxed and natural. The moment she reached inward, mana responded. Like water flowing down a path it had taken 1,000 times before, it surged smoothly through her circuits, lighting them with a quiet hum only she could feel. Boring. For someone like her, who had almost reached the pinnacle of power, this kind of basic exercise was something she didn't even need to practice anymore. Her control over mana was near perfect. There was no need to train it any further. Most students sat quietly, brows furrowed in focus. Some were sweating, especially those whose specialty was close combat and who didn't rely much on mana. But all of them could at least access their mana, even if they did so inefficiently. Then her gaze landed on Cale Ashford. He looked like he was struggling, as if he didn't even know how to sense his own mana. His face was pinched, eyes shut tight, his back slightly hunched, as if the mere act of sitting was a monumental task. It was almost comical. Elysia let out a quiet snort. Good acting. Of course, he put on a show like this, pretending to be weak, helpless, like someone who couldn't even feel his mana, let alone control it. And yet, her snort faded, and her expression darkened. She remembered. Just yesterday, Cale Ashford hadn't merely accessed mana. He had wielded it with terrifying precision. Facing that Cale Ashford had made even her, someone who believed she had nearly perfected her own control, feel like a beginner. Mana bent to Cale's will as if it were part of him. Fluid, adaptive, coldly efficient. There were no wasted movements, no flashy displays, just brutal, calculated application of force. That control was what made him so deadly. And now, he was pretending to struggle with the very basics? Liar. She narrowed her eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. What are you scheming, Cale Ashford? She glared at him. But Cale had no time to return her glare, because at that moment he was focused entirely on trying to sense the thing known as mana. He definitely felt something in his body, although he wasn't sure whether it was truly mana. 10 minutes passed. Although many students thought Professor Orwin's class was boring and pointless, Cale Ashford couldn't have been more grateful. After trying again and again, he definitely felt a strange sensation, subtle, faint but consistent. And although he couldn't say for sure, he thought it was mana. He became more certain each time he tried, as the sensation repeated itself. Something like a cool breeze seemed to emerge from what Professor Orwin called the source, spreading slowly through the rest of his body. Cale couldn't use it yet, but he was satisfied that he could at least circulate it somewhat. Finally, Professor Orwin opened his eyes and tapped his cane on the floor, the sharp clack snapping several students out of their meditative trance, or light nap. That will be enough for today, he said, voice dry but steady. From tomorrow onward, the first 10 minutes of every class will be dedicated to this exercise. He paced slowly in front of the students, his cane tapping rhythmically with each step. Mana control is not something you gain through shortcuts or brute strength. Even the most talented must polish it endlessly. A few groans echoed around the room, though most students were too tired to complain out loud. Now, on to something that requires less physical exertion, Orwin added, a faint glimmer of amusement in his pale eyes. Let's talk about the origin of mana. Cale blinked a few times, fighting the weight in his eyelids. He was tired, exhausted, really. His muscles still screamed from the morning Sylvia had put them through. His bones ached. His back hurt. Even sitting still was painful. But he didn't let his head droop. He couldn't afford to. This was the kind of information he couldn't figure out on his own. If he wanted to survive here, he had to understand this world. And mana was its foundation. Orwin flicked his fingers, and the glowing diagram shifted, replacing the human silhouette with a sprawling map of the continent. He began explaining how mana was tied to the land itself, how it pooled in natural formations, changed by region, and aligned with different elemental affinities. He spoke about places rich in fire aspect mana, areas where water-based magic weakened, and how one's surroundings could amplify or suppress certain mana types. Cale tried to keep up, scribbling notes as best he could, but much of it sounded like dense theory layered in unfamiliar terms. Concepts like aspect, flow, resonance fields, and geological mana tides went completely over his head. He caught fragments, enough to understand that magic was tied to geography and elemental affinity, but the deeper theory might as well have been in another language. And it was only thanks to the knowledge he had from the novel that he could follow it at all. Otherwise, none of it would have made any sense. Around him, students had begun to drift. Some rested their heads on their desks. Others sat upright, their eyes glazed with exhaustion. Sylvia's brutal training had drained them all. Cale felt the pull of fatigue too, but he forced his eyes to stay open. Even if he didn't understand everything now, he knew this knowledge could be vital later. Only a few still seemed alert. Elysia, of course, sat with perfect posture, her expression unreadable. Edwin looked bored but awake, lazily twirling a pen between his fingers. They weren't tired, but it was clear that this kind of information was nothing new to them, and they had little interest in hearing it again. That's the end of this period. Let's continue tomorrow. As Professor Orwin exited the room, the next instructor arrived soon after, tall, composed, and sharp-eyed. She introduced herself with practiced ease, gave a brief outline of the subject, and, just like Orwin, began with a recap of the fundamentals. Each new teacher followed a similar approach. Introductions, a basic overview of their subject, and a review of concepts most students already knew by heart. And while the rest of the class grew increasingly bored or drowsy, Cale Ashford listened with unwavering focus. For them, it was repetition. For him, it was a completely new knowledge. By the end of the day, Cale's hand ached from note-taking, his brain felt full to bursting, and his body still hadn't recovered from the morning's hellish training. But despite it all, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Progress. Despite this being just the first day of his transmigration, it had already been more than productive. He had learned more today than he could have ever imagined back in his life on Earth. The main reason was simple. He didn't know anything. And to survive, he knew he had to adapt as quickly as possible. Desperation and helplessness can surprisingly be the strongest motivators to push someone to work harder. The class had ended, but Cale Ashford couldn't just go back to his dorm and rest. No, he couldn't. Along with him, a group of other students groaned and complained because now that class was over, it was time for their punishment. Of course, just like how a few students had skipped class, there were also some who dared not show up for the punishment. Sylvia, punctual as always, was already waiting for them on the training ground. She ticked off names on her clipboard, marking those who showed up and leaving blank spaces for those who didn't. It went without saying that those who skipped would face an even harsher punishment later. Sure, they could run away now, but that also meant they might never graduate, or worse, get expelled. Cale Ashford couldn't help but think that those who gave up and quit Arcadia Academy might actually be lucky. They wouldn't have to die, like many others surely would. But that didn't mean they'd survive for long either. The Demon King's destruction spread far and wide, and eventually, the powerless would be the first to fall. There was no path of retreat. The only path to survival was forward, by becoming stronger. You all can start running, Sylvia declared without saying much. The students quietly obeyed and started running immediately. Cale Ashford's body hadn't recovered from the morning's training, and after a long day of classes, Cale Ashford now had to drag himself through 80 more laps. Just like in the morning, Cale ran at his own pace. Unlike earlier, there was no time limit this time. But of course, he couldn't stay on the training ground all night either. He still needed to eat. He needed to rest. Without that, he wouldn't even be able to walk tomorrow. 1 hour later. Damn it, I can't do it anymore. Just kill me already. Just what kind of hell did I join? Would this even be helpful? Students started to complain, as expected after an hour. Perhaps it is already surprising that they endure for 1 hour without complaining. Their entire bodies ached, and the punishment seemed beyond what they could handle. Cale had a somewhat manageable number of laps left, but not everyone was so fortunate. Many had gambled, thinking it was better to stop early in the morning and just accept the 50 extra laps after class. Most had only completed 30 or 40 laps before giving up. They now had to run more than 100 laps. It was nearly impossible, especially with no proper rest and a full day of classes behind them. Some students who had only missed the mark by a few laps grumbled as well. If only they had pushed a little harder, they might have avoided this punishment. There was even someone who had completed 97 laps in the morning, and unfortunately he had to finish that 3 laps plus the 50 laps as punishment. While the others groaned and cursed their fate, Cale Ashford didn't utter a word. He just kept running at the same steady pace. It wasn't that his body was stronger or that he wasn't tired like them. It was simply that he had already accepted this reality. He knew this was what he had to do to become stronger. Sylvia had been watching Cale Ashford for some time now. Even now, he isn't using any skills. Unbeknownst to her, Cale didn't even know how to use mana properly, let alone any mana-based skills. But to Sylvia, it looked deliberate, as if he was intentionally avoiding mana used to train his body. And she respected that. She found herself rethinking her earlier impression of him. She had assumed Cale was someone who would give up before the real fight even began. But clearly, she was wrong. 30 laps, huh? 1 hour in, and Cale had only completed 30 laps. Slower than his pace from the morning, but understandable considering his exhaustion. Still, he thought it was acceptable. If he could maintain this pace, he'd be done in 2 more hours or less. Of course, that was just wishful thinking. His body was already beginning to give out. The fatigue and stress were catching up fast. 30 more minutes passed. His pace slowed even further. He pushed himself, but it was no use. By now, most of the other students had collapsed or given up entirely. Some cursed the academy. Others claimed the punishment was too harsh and unfair. Amidst such atmosphere, only Cale Ashford was running, though it could barely be called running at the pace he was going. Look at that guy. He's still at it. Just give up already. You'll just collapse at this point. Ha, even a turtle's faster than him. At first, they laughed at how pathetic he looked, dragging his body across the track, even after clearly hitting his limit. But the laughter died soon, because Cale completed 10 more laps in that state. That brought him to 50 laps done. Only 30 more to go. Anyone could see it now. Even though Cale was barely running anymore, or maybe just walking or even crawling, he was going to complete the rest of the lap. It would take him another 2 or 3 hours at this rate. But the most shocking thing was, there was no sign of giving up in his eyes. Determination, no perhaps desperation, filled his eyes as he continued. Just what is pushing him? Sylvia wondered. In all her years, as a teacher, or even back when she was still doing her hero work, she had never seen anyone with Cale Ashford's level of determination. She glanced down at his rank in the student records. 137. It was almost laughable. With that much willpower and hard work, how could he be ranked so low? Unless he really had no talent. Or maybe, just maybe, this was the first time he had ever truly tried. She didn't know, but it was for certain that this low rank wouldn't last for too long. Elysia had spent most of her first day since the regression observing Cale Ashford, trying to be as subtle as possible. She didn't need to pay much attention in class. She had already learned all the material before and remained one of the top students. Her academic excellence wasn't something she needed to worry about. Time and again, she found herself impressed by Cale Ashford and his acting skill. Then came lunchtime, when Cale acted like he was lost before casually following the other students to the cafeteria. He ate alone, without any friends. No wonder I don't remember much about Cale Ashford's first year at Arcadia Academy. It was the way he blended into the background, friendless, quiet, always by himself. The day ended without Elysia uncovering anything useful. After classes, Elysia didn't return home like most students. Instead, she made her way to the training center, a sleek stone and marble facility separate from the open-air training grounds. Unlike the field-based group drills or instructor-led sessions, the center offered personal space, quiet, focused, and fully equipped for individual growth. Inside, it was dimly lit by glowing mana lamps embedded in the walls, casting long shadows across rows of reinforced dummies, weight racks, and high-quality equipment designed to withstand advanced magic and weapons training. Elysia selected an empty chamber, Unit 12, and stepped inside. The door sealed shut behind her with a quiet hiss of mana locks. She exhaled slowly, rolled her shoulders, and drew her sword. For the next 2 hours, the chamber echoed with the sharp swish of steel cutting through air, the thud of precise footwork, and the occasional clang of blade meeting reinforced targets. Sweat beaded on her brow, soaked into her shirt, and dripped onto the padded floor. She kept pushing, drilling forms, refining transitions between slashes, and tuning her footwork with calculated precision. Strike, step, parry, twist, slash, repeat, faster, sharper. Finally, her sword wavered mid-swing, stopping inches from the dummy's neck. Her breathing was ragged, her body coated in sweat. Her arms trembled slightly under the weight of fatigue. Tisk! She clicked her tongue and wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. My stamina's pathetic, she muttered, sheathing her blade. 2 hours, and I'm already this drained? Any more, and her body would be too exhausted, counterproductive for long-term development. Her previous life body had been battle-hardened, able to endure whatever she threw at it. This one, however, wasn't the same. Maybe this was the first time it had ever been pushed so hard. She doesn't remember training very seriously before enrolling to Arcadia Academy, where she always scored high in whatever test they did. In any case, she had to build herself back up slowly. Strength came with hard work, yes, but also with moderation, especially when the foundation was still weak. She exited the chamber, her steps slow but steady. As she stepped into the corridor that led to the showers, she paused, because through the transparent wall of Unit 7, she saw him. Edwin Leonhardt. He was drenched in sweat, his white shirt clinging to his frame. Every movement he made was precise and powerful. His sword slashed forward in a smooth arc, the air rippling with force as the dummy shuddered from the blow. He was still going, still training, still pushing. Unlike most students, Edwin continued to train hard from the day one of the school. Elysia stood in silence, watching. He's still at it. Her fingers curled slightly. In her previous life, just the sight of Edwin used to fill her with frustration. He had always been brilliant, strong, smart, charming, talented beyond belief. And he made it all look so easy. She had envied him, deeply. Not just her, probably everyone who met him probably felt the same. Especially those in the same class who constantly had to compete with him. No matter how hard anyone trained or how much they studied, Edwin always seemed to step ahead. The prodigy everyone looked up to, the benchmark no one could reach. But as the years passed by knowing each other at Arcadia and beyond, her view of him had changed. Because while everyone saw the talent, she started noticing what they didn't. The long hours he trained when no one was watching. The fact that he never missed a single session. The bruises on his hands, always hidden beneath gloves. The fatigue in his eyes after sleepless nights, mastering a spell that didn't come naturally. Yes, he was talented, but his real strength was that he never relied on it. He worked as if he had none, and in that, Elysia found a new kind of respect, not as an enemy to surpass, but as a rival to grow with. Not just a genius, but a relentless one. But even that genius, that tireless warrior, had fallen to the blade of humanity's betrayer. She exhaled slowly and turned away. She still had a long road ahead. If she wanted to protect what mattered this time, she had to grow, not just in talent, but in stamina, endurance, and will. She headed for the showers, sweat-soaked and sore. The steam curled around her as she stepped into the bath chamber, the scent of heated stone and faint floral oils drifting in the air. The Academy's baths weren't extravagant, but to Elysia, they were nothing short of heaven. She submerged herself slowly into the warm water, a soft exhale slipping from her lips as the heat seeped into her aching muscles. Her eyes fluttered shut. This is what I missed the most. A hot bath after a long day of sweat and strain. When she'd been traveling constantly, fighting one battle after another, there had been no time for luxuries like this. Often, she would go weeks without a proper wash, wiping off blood and grime with cold stream water, if she was lucky. And after the demon invasion, even cold water became rare. Cities were razed. Infrastructure collapsed. People lived in ruins, surviving day by day. Even the memory of warmth became distant, like a dream. Just a bath, something so simple. She leaned her head back against the smooth stone rim of the tub, letting the warmth soak into every inch of her battered body. How long had it been since she could just breathe? Since she could relax without the weight of death pressing against her spine? This world, this second chance, it was far from perfect. But in moments like these, she could feel it. The difference. The peace. And though she knew it wouldn't last, though she knew war was coming again, she could still savor it now. If only for a while. A small smile touched her lips as the water lapped gently against her skin. Warmth. Still here. Still hers. For now. Elysia exited the training center, steam still rising faintly from her damp hair, the night air cool against her flushed skin. She could have gone home after having completed her training for the day, but instead, her path veered naturally, almost instinctively, toward the open-air training grounds. He should be there. Her footsteps were light as she followed the stone path through the Academy gardens. Mana lamps flickered faintly under the twilight sky. Most of the campus was silent, the buzz of the day long faded. But not the training grounds. Even from afar, she could hear the soft rhythm of footsteps on dirt, labored breathing, and the sharp voice of Sylvia stern and uncompromising. The punishment laps were still going. Elysia approached quietly, hidden behind a hedge that bordered the field. Her eyes scanned the dim field. Several students had collapsed on the ground. Some had given up completely, sprawled on their backs or sitting with their heads down. A few still moved, barely, dragging their feet in exhausted circles. But one figure stood out. Cale Ashford. He looked like a wreck, soaked in sweat, arms limp, shirt clinging to him like a second skin. His steps were slow, barely more than a shuffle. Each footfall was a struggle, every breath hard-earned. But he hadn't stopped. Lap after lap, he kept going, swaying, dipping, staggering, but never falling. He moved not with pride or discipline, but rather like he was being chased, just as Elysia was. Elysia watched in silence, unmoving. The others had stopped long ago, too exhausted to care. But Cale, he was still running, alone and exhausted. And yet the look in his eyes hadn't changed. That same quiet fire burned, undimmed by fatigue. Not once had he complained. Not once had he looked for pity. Not once had he tried to be seen. He simply endured. Still acting, She muttered. She remembered him being very powerful vividly, so she didn't believe that he was struggling in such easy training. Congratulations. Sylvia's voice cracked through the air like a whip. That's the final lap. Good work. Sylvia ticked off the mark on Cale Ashford's name on her paper. She then looked at the other students, who were mostly collapsed from exhaustion, and concluded that none of them could continue. We will keep today's punishments as completed. Several students groaned in relief, dropping where they stood. However, if you didn't complete your punishment laps today, you will do them tomorrow. Plus 20 more for those who didn't complete today. 20 more. That's insane. No way I'll survive another morning like this. This is cruelty. Many complained, but no one dared speak directly against Professor Sylvia. Her reputation as a strict teacher who doesn't compromise was already well known. Dismissed. Get rest while you can. Everybody was too tired to walk right away, and some even rested on the ground. Cale walked away, tired but still moving, at a very slow pace. He hadn't complained once. Just before leaving the field, his legs buckled. He breathed hard and kept walking. To the dining hall. The scent of roasted beef, bread, herbs, and stew drifted through the air. He piled his plate with meat, roasted beef, grilled chicken wings, and pork ribs. A huge amount of food. The kitchen staff stared. "Are you going to eat all that?" one of them asked. Cale Ashford just nodded and walked with his trays of food. He sat at a far corner, alone. At another table, students leaned in, whispering among themselves. "This training, it's worse than I expected. I thought we'd be learning cool spells and swordplay. Not collapsing after 2 days. And tomorrow's worse. 20 extra laps for those who didn't finish today. Arcadia is brutal. I wonder how other academies are doing. This is what makes it the best academy across the continent." Some murmured, but maybe that's the point. Only monsters graduate from here. Still, one said, glancing at Cale, "That guy, he didn't complain once. Didn't even talk. Just ran, struggling to complete the laps. Yeah, weirdly inspiring. Or terrifying. Can't tell, but I envy it." Cale ignored them. He ate in silence. Later, after washing off the sweat and dirt in the showers, Cale collapsed on his bed. But he didn't sleep immediately. His body was tired, but his mind raced. This is real. There's no reset. No escape. I'm stuck in this world. I need to survive in this world. He recounted what he remembered from the novel and the important events that had yet to unfold. There were many events he should avoid and needs to avoid, as they are very dangerous, and he must keep track of those events. If there are events that he can't avoid, then he needs to make extra preparation for them. But in the end, becoming powerful is the permanent solution. My body, it's too weak for a swordsman. My arms are slow. I won't survive in this world if I stay this fragile. No one's coming to save me. First, I need to train this body. Then comes mana, which is very essential for me. Today, I grasped something during Professor Orwin's class on mana control. I need to learn how to control and use mana. Without the knowledge of that, I am far behind my peers. Not to mention surviving. I could be called the weakest person right now. Using mana is essential for using any type of skill. Therefore, learning about mana and using it should be my primary objective, along with strengthening my body. And then there are the skills. I remember quite a few skills that the MC and other characters acquire in the future. Those could be quite helpful, but for now, they're just things that I would like to get in the future. Without the basics, those things aren't very useful to me. However, I shouldn't change too much. Edwin Leon Hart still has to grow. He's the protagonist, the one who saves the world. If I take his chances away, he might become too weak to face the Demon King, and that would mean the end of the world. This is something that I must avoid at all costs. The sun had already risen when Cale Ashford finally opened his eyes. Still here, Cale muttered, though he found it much easier to accept this time. His body still ached from yesterday's excessive running, but it wasn't too bad, perhaps because he was still young. He washed up quickly and headed to the dining hall for breakfast. One thing he could genuinely appreciate about being transmigrated into this world was the food. Maybe it was because he rarely cooked back in his previous life, living alone and surviving on instant meals, but the food here was leagues better than anything he'd had before. After breakfast, he went to his first class, which, unfortunately, was the same as yesterday. The expressions on the students' faces were filled with dread, their muscles still sore from yesterday's punishment. Today, they were to complete the remaining laps from yesterday, plus the 100 laps assigned for today. If not, more punishment awaited them. Fortunately for Cale, he had completed his punishment laps yesterday and didn't need to worry about the backlog. The 100 laps was still a daunting number to finish in just 2 hours. Still, compared to yesterday, he felt better. His body had adapted a little, even if completing all 100 laps was still out of reach. The moment Professor Sylvia gave the signal, they began running. For some students, it seemed like they were doing worse than yesterday, probably due to exhaustion that hadn't fully recovered after just one night of sleep. Cale felt the same. His body still ached. However, he was getting used to this new body and no longer needed to constantly test its limits like yesterday. By the end of the 2 hours, he had finished 74 laps, 3 more than yesterday. It wasn't a huge difference, but it was progress nonetheless. Many students complained, knowing they would need to complete the remaining laps, plus an extra 50 in the evening. And some still had leftover punishment laps from yesterday. For them, it felt like the number of laps only increased day by day. Professor Sylvia clapped her hands, grabbing the students' attention as they groaned in exhaustion. All of you gather here. Your next class will also be taught by me, combat class. She paused for a moment, then added, let's have some of you duel so the rest can learn from watching. Her eyes swept over the group before she announced, today let's have our top 2 students demonstrate their skills. Edwin and Elysia stepped forward. Elysia and Edwin, 2 of the top students going head-to-head. This is going to be good. A top-tier swordsman's fight. Excitement rippled through the crowd the moment those 2 were chosen. Edwin, the one who had broken all of Arcadia Academy's previous records, and Elysia, who might have done the same if Edwin hadn't set new ones. Their entrance exam scores were in a league of their own. Maybe that's why Professor Sylvia wanted them to fight, so others could learn from the Clash of Titans. Cale remained silent, but leaned forward. Even he couldn't deny his curiosity. However, I know how this ends. He remembered this scene from the novel, where they fought for the first time. And the winner, of course, was the overpowered main character, Edwin Leon Hart. Both Edwin and Elysia stepped forward toward Professor Sylvia. Edwin wore a nonchalant expression, as if the outcome was already obvious. Elysia, however, looked excited and determined. She had lived this moment before. Back then, she had lost. But this time, she was determined to change the result. He probably thinks this will be easy. But things aren't the same as before. The 2 stepped into the dueling circle, marked by Sylvia's magic. Edwin Leon Hart, tall, poised, rested one hand casually on the hilt of his training sword. His presence was calm and confident, as always. Tisk. Elysia clicked her tongue in irritation. Even though she cared for Edwin, his younger, arrogant self always managed to get on her nerves. Still, she smiled. She was confident this time. Yes, she was physically weaker than Edwin, but she had something he didn't. Experience and memories from past life. She had fought Edwin thousands of times before. Though she lost most of those fights, it didn't mean she was helpless. Against the overconfident, less experienced version of Edwin, she believed she had a real chance. Are you two ready? Professor Sylvia asked. They both nodded. Begin. With a sharp swing, Elysia slashed downward. A blazing arc of compressed mana surged across the stage. Fast, wide, meant to pressure her opponent. Edwin dashed forward, weaving through the blast zone effortlessly. His figure blurred, vanishing and reappeared at her side. He slashed. Clang. Elysia blocked the attack just in time. Clang. Clang. Their swords clashed again and again, Edwin staying on the offensive. Their level is so far beyond mine. Is this what it means to be strong? I can't even see their swings. Just how fast are they? Damn. No wonder they're the top students. The crowd whispered in awe. Kale watched, stunned. So fast. I can't even follow their movements. For the first time, he glimpsed the kind of power that could be obtained in this world. Something impossible in his previous one. Can I become that strong? He wasn't sure. Right now, that level felt worlds away. Clang. Clang. Edwin remained relaxed. His sword spun effortlessly in one hand. His eyes held only confidence. Elysia, on the other hand, gripped her sword tightly, eyes sharp and focused. Mana burned in her veins. They moved again. Their swords collided, clash, 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 each spark lighting up the arena. But the difference was clear. Edwin's movements were fluid, almost lazy. He dodged by inches, countered with pinpoint precision, and smiled as if enjoying a dance. Elysia was mostly on the defensive, constantly pushed back. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Edwin is just too powerful. Even Elysia can't keep up. This isn't a fair fight. Edwin isn't even serious. She's going to lose before she even lands a hit. In the crowd, Cecilia clasped her hands tightly. Elysia, you can do it, she whispered. Kale stood in the front row, completely focused. He remembered this moment well. Edwin was supposed to win, overwhelmingly. But something was different. After a few more minutes, Edwin frowned. The fight had lasted longer than he expected. Though he remained confident, he was starting to get annoyed. Every time he launched a decisive strike, Elysia dodged at the last moment, like she knew. What was coming? What is this? Is she reading my moves? Frustrated, Edwin stepped forward. Lunar Fall. A crescent shock wave ripped through the air toward her. Gasps erupted. She's finished. Even Professor Sylvia readied herself to intervene. But Alicia's eyes sharpened. She saw it. The faint twist of Edwin's wrist, the angle of the arc. Now, she stepped into the blast and unleashed a massive spine-like sword slash. Boom! The explosion rocked the arena. Dust filled the air. When it cleared, did Elysia lose? The crowd murmured, but then they saw it. Edwin was on one knee. Alicia's blade rested at his neck. Elysia had won. Elysia stood firm, her sword still on her hand, holding tightly, the last traces of mana fading from its edge. Her breathing was heavy, shoulders rising and falling with exhaustion. Yet her eyes remained sharp, focused. Both were tired. Across from her, Edwin Leon Hart, the undefeated prodigy, the ranked first of Arcadia, was on one knee, gripping his sword. The silence in the arena was deafening. Then, wait, what? Elysia won? No way, Edwin lost. Gasps rippled through the crowd like thunder. Students stood from their seats, craning their necks in disbelief. Some rubbed their eyes. Others simply froze, as though their minds couldn't comprehend what they'd just witnessed. That's not possible. I thought Edwin never lost a single match. But now, he's on the ground? This match was supposed to be predictable. Edwin was the favorite to win. He has never been defeated before in a duel. Professor Sylvia watched everything with a knowing smile. She had already found out that Elysia has been leading Edwin on for some time, and she thought that Elysia was planning something. Although she didn't expect that the moment Elysia showed her hand, she would defeat Edwin, who is said to be a prodigy unlike anyone else. Looks like the prodigy has met his match. She was amazing, Cecilia whispered from the front row, eyes wide. Cale stood rooted to the ground, unable to move with his eyes widened. The world felt distant. His vision had narrowed to Elysia, standing victorious, and Edwin defeated. This can't be real. Edwin lost. He had read this part of the novel countless times. Their duel always ended the same way. Edwin wins every time. Elysia was supposed to give it her all and still fall short against the OPMC. That was how it was written. That was the way it was meant to be. But now, Elysia stood tall, her blade still gleaming, while Edwin, the strongest protagonist of this story, was kneeling in defeat. Cale's breath hitched. It was fast, uneven, as though he'd been running for miles. She's not following the script. She's stronger than before. Is the future changing? Is it because of me? But I didn't even do anything yet. What about the rest of the story? He clenched his fists. He had thought that by relying on MC, the world would get saved, and he just need to hold on until then. But with Elysia's victory, which was not supposed to happen, he became uncertain about it. Would everything really fall as it is in the novel, or would it change like the result of their battle? This change wasn't too big to cause any other changes, but it made him realize that perhaps not everything would go as the novel. However, it is well-recurring stuff in the novel that Edwin doesn't lose and cements his position as the strongest hero among their party. Yet he lost in their first duel. Cale Ashford didn't know whether he could now trust his information in the novel. On the other hand, Elysia, who was defeated, looked bewildered. It was to be expected, as he was someone who has never had a good opponent and never lost to another person. He expected the same when the fighting started and felt that Elysia would be an easy opponent like others. However, at the last second when victory seemed to be in his grasp, he was completely outplayed. He realized after that, this whole time, he was being played in the hands of Elysia. Her openings were fake in order to lure him in, and when he finally did, he had been caught in her traps. One critical mistake, and he was soundly defeated. It took him a while to admit and realize that he has indeed been defeated. Not by some professional heroes or stronger adults, but by someone of his age. One might think that his pride was wounded or his ego was hurt, but it wasn't the case for Edwin. Rather, he felt excitement for the first time ever. Professor Sylvia finally stepped forward on the field, her boots echoing as she crossed the field between the two fighters. The tension broke slightly as everyone turned to her. She stood between Edwin and Elysia, eyes sweeping across the entire arena. That will conclude the match. Her voice was firm and clear. The winner, Elysia von Arctria. Clap, clap. Applause filled the training ground. Whether it was Elysia or Edwin, both showed why they were the top students of the class, and their battle wasn't short of being legendary. After a few seconds, Sylvia raised a hand, calling for silence. Did you watch their fight? Everybody nodded. Although two of them are just first-year students, I would say that their strength is almost on par with even the third years. Sylvia complimented. There were mistakes here and there, but we can also address them later. You two can return to your seat. Edwin rose to his feet, still smiling faintly despite his loss. Until now, I haven't lost to anyone. You were the first one, Edwin said to Elysia. There wasn't any hate or anger, just respect and acknowledgement. Elysia nodded back nonchalantly, though her mind wasn't as calm as her outside demeanor. Serve you right. Who told you to underestimate me? Now you know how it feels to lose to someone. Professor Sylvia then proceeded to talk about some of the mistakes that two of them made, though it was more like how much Edwin underestimated Elysia and how Elysia took advantage of that. After that, the students were then allowed to practice on their own with their weapons with Sylvia instructing them. You were amazing out there, Cecilia complimented with genuine admiration. Stronger than I've ever seen you. Elysia wiped the sweat from her brow and gave a small smile. I had to be, Elysia replied, which Cecilia didn't really understand. You've changed. You're more focused, determined. Elysia didn't answer. Her gaze turned skyward for a moment, as if searching for something in the stars. Then she said softly, this time, I'm not letting history repeat itself. The class continued with students picking their desired weapons. Cale Ashford didn't know how to wield any of them. But since his class was that of a swordsman, he decided to pick up a sword. I don't know anything about swords. Better start with the basics. He stepped into one of the open spaces and mimicked the stance he saw others doing. Then he swung. Once. Twice. By the fifth swing, his shoulders were already sore. By the 10th, his back hurt. Sweat rolled down his neck, soaking into his training clothes. His arms trembled. This is harder than I thought. It wasn't because his body was weak or unused to training. It was the exhaustion from the morning laps that still lingered in his limbs. Nearby, other students were also practicing with their weapons. Most of them were far better than he was. A few hit the wooden practice dummies so hard that the statues cracked. One even snapped in half. Whoa, did you see that? He broke the dummy with just a wooden sword. That's insane. Cale looked down at his own sword. His grip was loose. His feet kept slipping. His swings were slow and unbalanced. I can't even swing properly. Still, he didn't stop. He kept going. Again and again. He would figure it out. Eventually. Then he heard a voice behind him. You're wasting energy. Cale turned. It was Professor Sylvia. She had been watching him for a while, arms crossed, silently observing. Your stance is too stiff, she said, and your position is wrong. She stepped forward and gently adjusted his hands on the wooden hilt. Grip here, not too tight. Let the sword move with your body, not against it. She showed him how to loosen his knees, pivot his feet, and swing with rhythm rather than raw strength. If you use force without flow, you'll tire out before landing a proper strike. Cale listened carefully. He followed every word and movement. Now try again, she said. Sylvia looked at Cale and tilted her head slightly. He doesn't even know the basics. Every student, even the lowest-ranked one, was better trained than most people outside the academy. Yet here stood Cale Ashford, a swordsman who didn't even know how to swing properly. Still, Sylvia didn't question him. She saw something else in him. Determination. Slash. Slash. This time, the swing felt lighter. Not perfect, but better. Sylvia nodded once. Good. Practice like that. Slowly. Don't rush to be flashy. Then she walked away, leaving Cale to continue on his own. Across the ground, Cecilia and Elysia trained side by side. Alicia's sword moved in fast, precise arcs, each strike controlled like a practice dance. Wow, Elysia, that was beautiful, Cecilia said, laughing. Elysia smiled faintly, her sword raised and ready for another round. She adjusted her stance and moved forward again. Their swords met with a clean clack of wood against wood. They weren't the only ones improving. Around them, students shouted techniques, helped each other, and sparred in pairs. Cale kept to himself. Not that he had a choice. It wasn't like he had any friends to spar with, even if he wanted to. Still, he focused on his own training, trying to understand how swords worked, how to move his body better, how to breathe. Swing, step, breathe. He followed everything Sylvia had taught him, slowing his movements to focus. Each swing now felt slightly stronger and more balanced. After a few hours, Sylvia clapped her hands. That's enough for today. Clean your weapons and return them to their original place. The students began putting their weapons away. Some chatted excitedly. Others groaned from soreness. Cale leaned against the wall, catching his breath. He glanced down at his hands, blisters already forming. But he didn't care. This is how it begins. One swing at a time. He stood up and headed for the exit of the training ground. Behind him, Cecilia's voice rang out. Elysia. The silver-haired girl glanced over her shoulder. But instead of responding, her gaze briefly shifted to Cale. Her eyes narrowed. Oomph. She snorted and dragged Cecilia forward, overtaking Cale on the way out. Cale was too exhausted to even notice. Professor Orwin's class. Take your seats, said Professor Orwin, his voice calm but firm. Once everyone settled down, he began. Today, we'll be discussing the nature of mana flow, he said. Most of you know mana is the energy we cultivate, but very few understand how unstable it becomes without proper control. He waved a hand, and a glowing diagram appeared in the air. Mana exists in every living being, but controlling it, shaping it, requires awareness of your body, your breath, and even your thoughts. If your mind is restless, your mana will scatter. If your body is tense, your flow will block. Kale sat quietly at the back, taking in every word. He didn't understand everything, but he listened carefully. It was important. The rest of the class continued with diagrams, theory lessons, and some guided breathing exercises. When evening came, the students gathered again at ground zero for their usual punishments, laps. It was just as exhausting as always. Kale ran harder than before, managing 76 laps before dropping to one knee. His shirt was soaked in sweat, but he didn't stop until Sylvia blew the whistle. Still not enough. Later that night, after dinner, Kale returned to his dorm, but he didn't go to bed. Instead, he knelt once more on the wooden floor. A single candle flickered beside him. He placed both hands on his knees. Mana restoration. Breathe in. Stabilize. Feel the core. He was learning to sense the mana inside him. Weak and flickering, but still there. He was tired. His body ached from training and running, but he knew none of it mattered unless he learned to control mana. Oh, huh. The ripple inside his chest shimmered faintly, still fragile, still weak, but a little more stable than before. Kale exhaled slowly. To survive, to fight. I need this. And so, once again, he continued his late-night mana training, alone in the dark, chasing a future only he could see. Meanwhile, inside the training room, a private room available only to the top-ranking students, Elysia practiced her combat techniques. The room glowed faintly across the walls. She moved gracefully, each slash echoing with control and force. Sweat dripped from her body, but her stance remained sharp. Then the door opened slowly. Elysia turned mid-swing. Edwin Leon Hart stood there with the training gloves on, his eyes serious. "Sorry to interrupt you, Elysia," he said calmly, "but I have a request." Elysia lowered her blade slightly, curious. A request. He took a step forward. A rematch. She blinked, studying him. "You caught me off guard last time," he said with a small grin. "But let's be honest, it was too close. I don't like unfinished fights." Elysia lowered her sword for a moment. "So, you want to settle here? In this room?" "Yeah. No rules. No audience. Just us. A friendly match, but serious." She paused, then gave a small nod. "Fine. I accept." They both readied themselves. Elysia held her blade in front of her, her stance firm and centered. Edwin grinned, raising his own sword slowly. "Let's get started." Clang, clang. Their weapons clashed with amazing force. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Edwin quickly rushed forward to attack, swinging his sword so fast that it looked like a blur. Elysia blocked his attack, then immediately struck back with a fast move. Her sword slightly hit Edwin, cutting slightly on his shoulder. He grunted, but didn't pause. His body flickered. He reappeared at her side, sword swinging through the air. Elysia dodged somehow. Her sword flared with mana, sweeping toward his legs. He leapt backward, narrowly avoiding the blow. They circled each other. Edwin launched forward again. His strikes were heavier, more forceful. Her defense was strong and precise, but also smooth and graceful. Every time she blocked an attack, she moved fluidly into the next block. He rushed in again. Clang, clang. A powerful blow slammed into her shoulder, pushing her back. Blood flowed from a small wound. She fell down a little bit, but she kept standing. Even though she was wounded slightly, she didn't fall. She managed to stay standing. She narrowed her eyes. She used her sword style. Her blade glowed red as she spun, delivering a vicious slash across Edwin's ribs. He groaned in pain, stumbling. His knees bent briefly, but he didn't fall. He tightened his grip. He surged forward again, blade shimmering with compressed mana. He raised it overhead. "This ends it." Elysia raised her sword to block, but he was too fast. Boom! The force of the blow shook the ground. Her defense cracked. The mana barrier shattered. She was thrown backward, her body crashing hard onto the floor. Dust settled slowly. Dust and mana particles swept away. Edwin dropped to one knee, blood dripping from his stomach and shoulder. His other hand held tightly to his sword. "It's over," he said. Elysia lay still, breathing but unmoving. He stood up slowly, walking toward her. "You nearly had me again," he whispered, offering her his hand. She took it. He helped her to her feet. They both stood, barely holding on. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, then nodded in mutual respect. Edwin won the match. "I envy you. You are strong, Elysia." "I didn't expect you to keep your balance after that rib strike," Elysia said, breaking the silence. Edwin chuckled, a hand resting over his injury. "Guess I'm tougher than I look." They stood in silence for a moment, the soft hum of mana still lingering in the air around them. "Same time next time?" Edwin asked, half joking, half serious. Elysia glanced at him, her voice calm. "Next time I won't lose. I'll be ready for that." He gave her a lazy two-fingered salute and turned to leave. "Take care, Elysia." She watched him disappear beyond the training doors. The tension in her shoulders softened, but her mind remained restless. He's strong, but even that wasn't the limit. She glanced down at her blade, fingers tightening slightly on the hilt. "I need to get stronger too." Later that evening, the students stood at ground zero once again, gathered up for their routine punishment run. "Run!" Professor Sylvia's voice echoed across the field like a war horn. Cale Ashford bolted forward, his expression unreadable, legs already sore from the day's training. His breathing was steady. Lap after lap, he continued. Quiet, alone, focused. Elysia, running a few lanes apart, caught a glimpse of him through the corner of her eye. He wasn't fast. He didn't stand out. He didn't push past his limits like some others. But he was always there, always moving forward. Her eyes lingered on him longer than usual. He's not improving? Or is he hiding it? There was no visible change. No surge of mana. No secret spark. Just Cale, running the same as yesterday and the day before. Something's off. Her gaze sharpened for a brief second. Is he truly this weak? Or pretending? And if he's pretending, why? She frowned slightly. Even now, despite exhaustion burning in her limbs and bruises still throbbing from the duel, she found herself thinking about him. Cale Ashford, a nobody, a man who killed me in the war zone. She didn't understand him, and that bothered her. Her lips pressed together as she looked away and focused on her running. Cale, unaware of the gaze he'd drawn, kept running. One step at a time. No bursts of energy. No flashy aura. Just quiet determination written across his sweat-soaked face. The sky darkened slowly above them. The lap count increased. Voices faded. Unseen, unnoticed, Cale kept pushing forward. That night, Cale sat in his dorm, cross-legged on the floor. Candlelight flickered beside him. He had no idea a rematch had taken place. He focused on his core, breathing slowly, drawing mana inward. The ripple inside his chest stirred faintly. He recalled Professor Orwin's teachings. He inhaled, exhaled deeply, one breath at a time, one swing at a time. In the silence of his room, Cale continued to train, quietly, with purpose. 4 days had passed since Cale Ashford entered Arcadia Academy. 4 days of relentless running, bruising sparring sessions, and sleepless nights weighed down by exhaustion. Now it was finally the weekend, his first breath of freedom since stepping through the academy gates. And he wasn't going to waste it. In the early morning, when fog still clung to the stone paths, Cale walked silently through the dormitory halls. His hood was pulled up, casting shadows over tired eyes that burned with determination. "I can't keep doing nothing," he muttered. "I need to grow stronger. I don't have time for rest." Most students were still in bed, recovering, especially those like him, constantly punished and underestimated. But Cale's thoughts were elsewhere. In his hand, he clutched a worn, creased slip of parchment. On it were ancient runes, a specific sequence he remembered clearly from the novel he had read back in his original world. The world that had now become his reality. These symbols weren't random. They were the key to something powerful. A seal box. In the novel, the box had been discovered by one of the major antagonists, a ruthless swordsman named Zereth Kane. Inside it was a technique known as astral severance, a lost sword art, a forbidden technique that let the wielder channel all their mana into a single, devastating slash that tore through space itself. The blade didn't just cut flesh or steel, it severed everything in its path. Xerath had found the box by accident and spent months deciphering the runes to unlock it. Once he mastered astral severance, he became one of the deadliest enemies the hero's party had ever faced. With one swing, he could cleave through magical barriers, sever enchanted weapons, and even cut through summoned beasts. Kale remembered reading the scene vividly. Xerath standing atop a battlefield, sword covered in blood, his enemies falling in droves as the sky itself seemed to split with each strike. And now, he had a chance to claim that same technique. Before Xerath Kane could. "I'm not even sure if the box is really there," he muttered. "It might be that at this time, the seal box isn't even there. Anyway, I have to at least try my luck." The location, according to the novel, was relatively safe, overlooked, forgotten. That's why Kale had chosen to search for it. He knew about other powerful techniques, but most of them were hidden in dangerous places, or worse, meant for the hero party. And as someone who didn't want to weaken the hero party, he had to refrain from taking anything that the protagonist was fated to obtain. Otherwise, if the hero was even slightly weaker, there was a chance they would lose against the Demon King, and the world would perish. That was something Kale had to keep in mind whenever he made big decisions like this. Kale left the academy grounds quietly, his footsteps echoing faintly in the early morning silence. Well, school guards were still there, but he was allowed to leave after showing his student ID. The city of Elysia was still stirring awake, the fog wrapping around stone buildings like a veil. Shops were closed, the streets mostly empty, save for a few early merchants dragging carts behind them. He made his way toward the teleportation terminal at the city's edge, a massive circular structure glowing faintly with etched runes. At the center stood an arched gate of shimmering light, a portal that could transport someone across entire regions in seconds. Of course, such convenience came at a steep price. Kale stepped up to the counter, where a bored-looking attendant yawned behind a crystal console. "Destination?" she asked without looking at him. "Viralton," Kale said. That was the city mentioned in the novel, the one where the sealed box would appear, hidden deep within the ruins beneath the old temple grounds. The attendant blinked once, checked the console, then whistled. "Standard fare, 320 gold. Kale felt his heart drop. He dug into his pocket and held out his Arcadia Academy student ID. "Discount." The attendant scanned it against the crystal. The console flashed green, then adjusted the fare. 80% off for Arcadia students, she said. "That'll be 64 gold. Still too much." Kale stared at the number, as if he could make it shrink with willpower alone. He had just a bit more than that for a round trip, enough for meals and basic supplies for the rest of the month, not for a luxury like this. If he paid now, he'd be broke. And worse, hungry. Damn you, Kale Ashford. Not only weak, but broke? That's the worst possible combination. Unwillingly, he gave away almost half of what he had and bet everything on the sealed box being there. Otherwise, he would have wasted all his money for nothing. "Accepted. You may go in," the attendant said. Kale Ashford nodded and walked toward the portal. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. "Even when I know the future, I'm still just a broke extra." There was no way around it. He needed money. And not just scraps. If he wanted to keep moving forward, he couldn't afford to live on the edge of starvation. Information wasn't enough. Knowledge of future events was powerful, yes, but not if he couldn't act on it. "I don't want to just survive," he said quietly, eyes narrowing. "I want to survive with wealth, too." He clenched his fist around the parchment in his pocket. After all, while survival was definitely the main goal, wasn't it better if he could do that with a bit of comfort? Besides, wealth meant freedom and power. Freedom to move, to gather rare items, to access secret libraries, dungeons, black market auctions, everything. He would need to adjust his plan for building his wealth as well. Wow. Anyways, this was his first time stepping through a portal in a fantasy world. Something that in the real world, people only dreamed about. He was nervous and excited. Phew, let's go. As Kale stepped into the glowing arch, the world bent around him. His stomach lurched, like falling and flying at once. A rushing sensation swallowed his senses, weightlessness pulling him forward, the light growing brighter, and then he landed. Hard. On his feet, thankfully, the world snapped back into focus. He was no longer in Elysia. Viralton. The teleportation terminal here was much older, worn and moss-covered, tucked into the side of a cliff path overlooking the mist-covered valley below. The gate behind him flickered once, then dimmed. "Whoa," Cale whispered. He turned slowly, taking it all in. Firstly, the attendant stationed there welcomed him, and then registered his ID. Then only was he allowed to go. The city of Viralton was smaller than Elysia, far less developed. It looked almost ancient, with crumbling stone buildings and arched bridges stretching over narrow rivers that split the city into segments. Ivy coiled up the sides of towers, and temple bells chimed in the distance, echoing faintly in the morning fog. The air was cooler here, the scent of damp moss and old stone heavier. Birds circled lazily overhead, and the streets were near empty. This place had a kind of eerie peace. Still looks just like the novel described. Cale muttered, stepping away from the terminal and down a set of cracked steps. Old Temple District. That was where the seal box was supposed to be, according to the novel. It had been hidden for decades in the ruins beneath a once grand temple dedicated to the goddess of fate. After the church abandoned the site, it became a relic, then a ruin. Locals feared it now, believing it cursed. But Cale knew better. Or at least, he hoped he did. He followed a winding cobbled path that led out of the central plaza. The stone roads here were crooked and aged, as if forgotten by time. The further he walked, the less populated it became. No stalls, no chatter, just the crunch of his boots against gravel and the occasional creak of an old weather vane. Eventually, he reached a crumbling archway, the words Sanctum of Athyra barely visible on the worn plaque above it. This was a place. The temple stood at the top of a hill, partially collapsed, with gnarled roots tearing through its foundation. Cracked marble columns supported what remained of the front entrance, and shattered stained glass lay in glinting fragments at the foot of its heavy, rotting doors. Cale stood still for a moment. The air here was different. He pushed the doors open. The interior was worse than the outside. Broken pews lay scattered across the dusty floor. Weeds and vines had forced their way through the walls. Sunlight filtered through the cracked dome above, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. And at the far end, behind the shattered altar, was the staircase, half buried beneath rubble, just like in the novel. Cale's heart pounded. He scrambled over debris, pushing aside chunks of stone, until he found what he was looking for, a hollow under the altar. With effort, he cleared the path. The staircase descended into darkness, just like the novel described. He took a deep breath. No turning back now. He muttered, lighting a torch from his pocket and holding it aloft. The light flickered, casting blue shadows across the narrow walls as he began to descend. The steps were uneven, carved from old stone and slick with moisture. The further down he went, the colder it became. Cale moved slowly through the narrow stone corridor, his torch crackling softly as shadows danced along the walls. The underground ruin was larger than he expected, far more vast and winding than the novel had made it seem. The first chamber was empty, save for rotted prayer scrolls and fallen statues. The second was collapsed completely, forcing him to squeeze through a gap in the rubble. The third, nothing, just dust and silence. An hour passed. Cale's legs ached from crouching and climbing. His breath fogged in the cold air, the damp seeping into his skin. Still, he pressed on. 2 hours. He circled what felt like the same corridor 3 times. The carvings on the walls began to blur together. Every alcove, every hollow pedestal, led to nothing but disappointment. He stopped and sat down on a crumbled step, running a hand through his hair. Maybe I was wrong. He leaned back against the wall, the cold stone biting into his spine. He stared up at the low ceiling where cracked etchings of the goddess of fate loomed, half forgotten. I remembered everything correctly, didn't I? He muttered to himself. However, the novel didn't have each and every piece of information, and that proved to make it that much harder for him to get the seal box. 3 hours. Cale had reached the lowest part of the ruins. Just a circular chamber, flooded slightly at the edges. Moss grew over the floor, and the air was thick, stale. He walked to the center and stopped. He thought that perhaps at the end of this palace, he might stumble upon the sealed box, but still no sign. No box, no reaction, just silence. Cale slowly sank to his knees. Maybe it really was fate, he whispered, voice hollow. Maybe the box only revealed itself to Xerath, not to someone like me. He clenched his fists. I'm not the chosen one. I'm not the hero. I'm not even a villain. He grit his teeth, head bowed. Just an extra. The torchlight dimmed slightly, the flame flickering in rhythm with his breath. Cale sat there in silence, cold stone beneath him, dust clinging to his hands and knees. His heart felt heavy. He had risked everything, his money, his energy, his hope, and there was nothing. No grand reward, no sealed relic, no ancient box waiting just for him. Just ruins, cracked walls, and rotting wood. A forgotten place, just like the extra he was supposed to be. Enough, he muttered, voice hoarse. He pushed himself to his feet, joints stiff and aching from hours of searching. His legs trembled slightly as he began walking back the way he came, leaving the center chamber behind. Step by step, he climbed the cracked stairs, retracing the path he'd carved through the rubble and darkness. I was stupid to think I could rewrite anything, he whispered to the empty hall. Even with knowledge, I'm still. Then he stopped, mid-step. His foot had just touched the stair, but he felt it. A pulse, a shiver that didn't come from a cold. Something had tugged at his chest, like a thread pulling inward from deep beneath his sternum. It wasn't pain. It wasn't pressure. Just something. He stood still. What was that? He couldn't explain it. He didn't understand what he had just felt, but it hadn't been normal. He looked at his hand, holding the nearly burned-out torch. His other hand rested against the damp wall. Then it came again, faint but real, like the air itself was breathing differently. A rhythm, a whisper, mana? But that couldn't be it. Cale still hadn't been able to use mana properly. He could sense traces of it in classes, see it in other students' techniques, but he still wasn't capable of using mana. Still, pulse. This one is stronger. Cale staggered back, his heart racing. The torch flame flared in response, just for a second, before settling again. What the hell is going on? His gaze slowly shifted to the wall beside him. It looked the same, cracked, moss-covered. But there, about eye level, was something he hadn't noticed before. A faint outline in the stone. A symbol, half-faded, shallowly etched, just a curve and a line. Not enough to draw attention at a glance. His breath caught. Carefully, he brought the torch closer. There were more, carved into the wall around it, only visible from the right angle, and only when lit closely. An illusion. No, not an illusion. A concealment seal. Magic had hidden it. And maybe, only now, because he had felt something, had reacted to something. Cale pressed his hand against the rune. The wall trembled. Dust fell. And slowly, a section of stone began to sink inward, then slide aside, revealing a narrow, hidden passage behind it. A chill rolled out from the darkness, carrying with it a hum of mana, so raw and ancient it made Cale's skin crawl. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. Then, almost like he was dreaming, he stepped through. There, at the end of the short tunnel, resting on a raised stone dais, was a box, black, bound with runes, and undeniably alive with power. It pulsed faintly, like a heart beating in stillness. Cale's steps were slow, his expression unreadable as he walked forward. His hand reached out. He didn't know if it was fate, or the faint echo of mana, or his own stubborn will that let him hear. But in the end, he had found it. The sealed box. Cale didn't open the box. Not yet. He just stood there, staring down at it. This thing he'd crossed cities for, crawled through ruins, nearly lost hope over. It looked unassuming. A matte black surface, trimmed with faint silver veins that pulsed with magic, barely visible to the naked eye. It felt alive. He didn't touch it again after that first contact. He didn't dare. Instead, he pulled off his coat and carefully wrapped it around the box, hiding the runes from sight. Cale carried it like it was a bomb. He didn't linger. Back through the hidden tunnel, past the stairs and the rotted altar. His boots echoed over the temple floor as he emerged from the ruins. The sky was still foggy, though the sun had climbed higher. He hadn't realized how much time had passed. It felt like dusk, like the world should have shifted after what he'd just seen. But it hadn't. Everything looked the same. The cracked marble, the ivy-covered stone, the wind. Cale adjusted the coat-covered box under his arm, glancing around. He started down the hill, and the paranoia hit almost immediately. What if someone saw? No one should have been watching. The temple was abandoned. The whole district was half dead. But that didn't stop the feeling, the prickling at the back of his neck, the way his eyes darted towards shadows and doorways, alleys under archways. He picked up his pace. "Just get back," he muttered under his breath. "Back to the dorm. Then I will open it." The streets felt too quiet now. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. Every crow call overhead made his shoulders tense. What if someone knew he was here? What if they followed him? What if they were waiting? The coat suddenly felt too thin, like it couldn't hide anything, like the box might shine right through it, leaking power into the air. He hugged it tighter. A pair of old men shuffled past him near the plaza, muttering about fish prices. Cale flinched anyway. He didn't take the main road. Instead, he ducked through narrow alleys, moving fast, eyes constantly scanning. One hand hovered near the training dagger at his hip. Not that it would help much. He had no idea how many people in this city might kill for a box like this. The thought didn't help his anxiety, rather increased it. He reached the teleportation terminal by noon. "Back to Elysia," he said quickly to the attendant, voice a little too high-pitched. "Class resumption." The old man looked him up and down. Cale kept his grip firm on the coat-covered bundle and paid 64 golds. After showing his ID, the man nodded, scanned the ID, then gestured toward the glowing arch. Cale stepped through without hesitation. And again, the world twisted. Fell. Flashed. He stumbled onto the platform in Elysia, heart still racing. This time, he barely noticed the sickness in his stomach. He didn't stop to admire the view. Didn't greet the attendant nor the guards. He just ran. Through the academy gates. Past the garden. Up the stairs. He didn't even take the elevator orb. He was too paranoid to wait. Cale reached the dormitory hallway drenched in sweat, chest heaving. The second he was inside his room, he shut the door, locked it twice, and pulled the curtain over the window. Then he slid to the floor, clutching the box to his chest. Only when the silence of his room finally settled around him, when he was sure no one had followed him, when not even the wind made the curtains move, did he breathe out. He placed the box gently on his bed and stared at it. "Now," he whispered, voice ragged. "Let's open it." That night, after a quick wash and a change of clothes, Cale sat cross-legged on his bed. The sealed box rested in front of him. He took a deep breath. "Whatever you are, let's see it." His fingers brushed the carved surface, and this time, the box clicked open without resistance. Inside was a single object, a circular black orb, about the size of an apple. The object was floating a little above the box, turning slowly and letting out thin streams of very dark smoke that moved like snakes through the air. Its surface was so dark, so perfectly smooth, it felt like looking into the void. Cale reached out. The moment his fingers touched it, pain. His body jerked backward. The orb didn't fall. It moved with him, drawn to him, as if magnetized. Then, without warning, it pressed into his chest, phasing through his skin like mist. Cale screamed. It felt like his entire body was burning from the inside. He collapsed onto the floor, trembling violently. Sweat poured down his face. His limbs locked up, muscles spasming. It was like being struck by lightning again and again. What is this thing? In the novel, this skill doesn't describe this much painful as it is used to when Xerath acquire it. Is it because I am weak? He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like he would die. But even through the pain, his instincts took over. What he always did when overwhelmed. Meditate. Focus. Breathe. Cale forced his eyes shut, his mind clawing for clarity. He concentrated. The pain remains in his body for 1 hour, 2 hours. Then, after few hours of endurance, silence. The pain took a few hours to remain calm. He could feel energy and knowledge from that skill. As described in the novel, this skill, astral severance, when used by the antagonist Zirith, dust erupted, creating the video slosh in the stars. But its presence shook the very illusion. Astral severance. Kale's eyes widened. His body felt different now, heavier, yet full. He raised his hand, and a memory of the astral severance played in his mind. He mimicked the movement, but the technique was there, etched in his body, imprinted in his soul. He opened his eyes and returned from the pain. Kale gasped as he sat upright. His heart pounded, his hands still trembled, and the box was gone. Its energy was now within him, and in his mind, the sword art echoed. Astral severance. The rest of the academy slept quietly. I should practice this skill, so-called astral severance, tomorrow. Right after Kale returned from the teleportation gate, he didn't stop to rest. He had the seal box with him, and he knew he didn't have time to waste. Kale walked straight toward the training station, in a gym, a large place equipment, and a practice room that is always open day and night. The place was quiet and empty, lit with glowing lanterns that gave off a soft blue light. The night air was cool, but Kale's heart was burning with urgency. Astral severance. That was the name of the skill. And now, Kale was ready to try it. He took a deep breath and held the training sword in both hands. He didn't care how strange he looked, swinging at empty air. He wasn't here to impress anyone. Let's begin. Swish. He swung the blade hard, but immediately he felt it, a huge pull from inside his body. His mana, his energy, was being drained fast. It felt like half of it was gone in a single second. And the result? Nothing. No crack in the air. No power. No flash. Just silence. Kale's knees gave out. He dropped to the ground. Ugh. His hands were shaking, his body weak. He couldn't move. All his stamina was gone. All his mana drained. He was exhausted from just one swing. How can anyone use this? He muttered. It's too much. He sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, breathing heavily. This skill, it takes everything I have just to try it once. I don't even know how to use it. After a while, he stood up again. His arms still trembled, but he held the sword tighter. He closed his eyes and tried again. Another swing. Another drain. I just have to keep going. Hours passed. Kale kept trying again and again. Swinging. Falling. Breathing. Focusing. Even when his body was in pain. Even when his mana was gone. He didn't stop. He practiced until his muscles wouldn't move. Until he had nothing left. Several hours passed. By now, the entire first-year dormitory was silent. Most students had collapsed onto their beds, too exhausted from the morning's 100 laps and afternoon combat drills. Their rooms were dark. The hallways are quiet. But not Kale. While others rested peacefully, dreaming away the soreness in their legs, Kale remained in the training station inside gymnastics, sword in hand, body trembling, sweat-soaked clothes clinging to his skin. They're all asleep, resting after a hard day. But here I am, still swinging at air, chasing something I don't even understand. He gritted his teeth, planting his feet once more on the padded floor of the gym's practice zone. I don't even know how this skill is supposed to work. Kale's thoughts drifted back to the novel, the original story. Zirith, the one who used astral severance with terrifying precision. How did Zirith do it? In the novel, there had only been vague descriptions. A single line about splitting the sky, another about drawing power from within the void. Not enough to guide him, not enough to teach him. And yet, it was all Kale had. He sat down against the wall, gasping, his hands still locked around the hilt of his sword. His body was screaming. His muscles burned with every small movement. His mana core felt dry, like a cracked well. Still, he refused to leave. Tomorrow's a holiday, Kale whispered, smiling faintly. I've got time. And so, he rested that night. The next day, while the academy rested, students enjoying their day off with books, snacks, and silence. Kale ate huge amount of food abnormally and returned immediately to the training room. After eating, he took only 5 minutes to catch his breath, then stood once more. One more day to improve. One more day before training resumes. I have to make this count. He swung, and again, and again. Each strike drained him. Each movement took more than it gave. He trained whole day. Nightfall. Darkness fell across Arcadia once more. Lanterns flickered along the pathways. The academy slept again. But in the glowing silence of the training station, Cale stood alone, panting heavily, knees bent, sword shaking in his grip. Swoosh, crack. The air split only a little amount. A faint shimmer. A tear in the stillness. And then, I did it. Not fully, not like Xerath, but the effect was small. Tiny, but real. He had finally drawn a response from the skill. I still don't know how it works, he whispered to the empty room. But I will get it closer. His arms were bruised. His body sore. Every muscle in his back ached like fire. But Cale smiled. He looked down at his shaking hands and clenched them tighter around the hilt. It's not about mastering it overnight, he muttered. It's about pushing myself one step at a time. He stood again, legs trembling under his weight. And with the moon high above Arcadia, he began once more. Swinging, training, fighting against the limits of his body. Because even if he didn't fully understand astral severance, even if it left him broken each time, Cale refused to stop. Not ever. And so the week ends. The next morning, as usual, all first-year students gather at Ground Zero, dressed in training uniforms, some yawning, others stretching stiffly. The sky was pale with early morning light. Professor Sylvia stood at the front, her arms crossed. Her eyes scanned the crowd before she spoke. Begin. The signal was given. We ran. Cale didn't take long before the pain hit him. His legs, already sore from yesterday, started burning after the first few laps. His shoulders ached, his back throbbed, and his mana was barely recovering. By the time he reached his 65th lap, his vision blurred slightly from the exhaustion that had built over 2 days of nonstop training. He staggered, breathing heavily, arms swinging with effort as he pushed himself forward. I can't run anymore today. It wasn't a matter of will anymore. His body simply couldn't. When Sylvia called time, Cale had completed only 65 laps. A record low for him. Half the students had reached the full 100. Some had fallen just short, 94, 96, 97. Cale could see them, their expressions tired but proud. He wasn't jealous. Instead, he looked down at his trembling hands. I chose this path. I gave everything to learn astral severance. This is the cost. He didn't expect recognition. He didn't want pity. He just needed time. Time to catch up. Time to understand. Because even though he had fallen behind today, then he collapsed to the ground. Cale collapsed on the ground, his limbs heavy and his chest heaving with exhaustion. The ache of overtraining wrapped around his body like chains. All around him, the field slowly emptied. Some students slipped off toward the classrooms for the shade, dragging their tired bodies along the stone paths. Others made a beeline for the water stations, washing sweat from their faces and gulping down mouthfuls of relief. Elysia was calmly talking with Edwin and Jean Halden near the edge of the school grounds, just after the laps. But Cale stayed where he was, flat on his back, unable to move. Then something changed. A cool, tingling sensation spread over his skin. A soft light pulsed gently at his chest, like waves brushing against the shore. The tightness in his muscles loosened. The sharp throb in his legs vanished. Even the deep, purple bruises on his arms, the result of night after night of sword swings, began to fade. He opened his eyes slowly, and what he saw made his breath catch for a different reason entirely. Cecilia was kneeling beside him, one hand glowing with healing mana as it hovered just above his chest. Her silver blonde hair swayed gently with the breeze. Her soft green eyes, sharp with focus, glowed faintly under the early morning light. Up close, she looked even more beautiful than the novel had described. Cale's heart skipped a beat. She's stunning. Even the book didn't do her justice. He had read about her countless times, her strength, her elegance, her importance in the story. But this was the first time she was real. The first time she was right in front of him. And now, he was the first person at the entire academy to speak to her. "You're awake," Cecilia said softly, a faint smile on her lips. Cale sat up slowly, blinking in disbelief at how light his body felt. His bruises were gone. His soreness had vanished. "You healed me?" he asked, voice still slightly rough. Cecilia nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You weren't the only one who collapsed. I've been healing a few others who pushed themselves too far." She studied him for a moment longer. "And you looked worse than anyone." Kale gave a weak, breathless laugh. I figured." Her brows creased gently. "You should be careful, Kale. If you break yourself, who's going to carry the strength you're chasing?" He looked down at his hands, still trembling, but whole. "I don't really have a choice," he muttered under his breath. There was a pause. Then Cecilia said, softly but firmly, "There's always a choice. But I won't stop you. I just don't want to see my classmates hurt." Kale turned toward her, this time not hiding the gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, really, for healing me." Cecilia stood, brushing the dust off her knees with graceful ease. "Next time, don't make me heal you. Just don't destroy yourself trying to catch up." Kale nodded, smiling faintly. Then, as she began to walk away, she turned back, her eyes meeting his once more. She smiled, gentle, warm, and entirely genuine. "Come on, get up now. You won't be able to keep up if you keep lying here." Kale sat there for a second longer, watching her walk away. His heart was still pounding. So that's Cecilia, kind, strong, and he stood up slowly, his hand brushing his side where her healing light had touched him. "I won't forget this. She looks like an angel. Anyone could fall for her if she near to someone. I will repay you." 2 hours passed. Professor Sylvia arrived, and all the students quickly gathered at ground zero again. Her sharp eyes swept across the field as she addressed the group. "This is the second week for all of you," she said. "From now on, you'll undergo several types of training each day. First, the usual 100 laps must be completed within 2 hours. Second, combat training. And third, starting this week, I will train you about body endurance." Murmurs rippled through the group. "What kind of endurance?" someone whispered from the back. Professor Sylvia's expression didn't change. "We have a special facility near the main hall," she continued. "It's called the Glacier Room. The temperature inside is minus 60 degrees Celsius. It was built to hold more than 500 people, and all of you will be training inside it." The students looked at each other in disbelief. "Minus 60, someone gasped. Without another word, Professor Sylvia turned and began walking. "Follow me." We followed her across the academy grounds. A thin fog slowly moved along the stone paths as we walked toward a huge iron door built into the side of the training building. Above the door, shiny silver letters spelled out, "Glacier Room." A burst of freezing air escaped as the door opened. We stepped inside. At first, it wasn't too bad, just cold enough to make us tighten our jackets and rub our arms. A few chuckles broke the tension. Maybe it wouldn't be as hard as it sounded. But that illusion didn't last. 5 minutes passed. Then the real cold hit. Our breath began to fog in front of our faces. Fingers turned numb. Teeth started to chatter. The chill didn't just touch the skin. It crept deep into our bones. Some students couldn't take it. Shivering uncontrollably, they rushed back to the exit. Within 15 minutes, nearly a third had given up. By the 30-minute mark, even the strongest among us were struggling. But still, a few remained unmoving. Edwin stood with arms crossed, stoic as ever. Jean Halden crouched low, controlling his breathing. Elysia stood calmly, eyes closed, her long hair dusted with frost. Cecilia's hands glowed faintly with a soft golden light, using subtle healing to maintain her body temperature. But she didn't use it on others. And me? I lasted 30 minutes. After that, my legs grew stiff and my vision started to blur. My lips had turned blue, and I couldn't even feel my fingers. I was about to freeze. With trembling steps, I stumbled toward the door and pushed it open, gasping as warm air hit my face outside the chamber. 30 minutes, I muttered. I couldn't even make it halfway. 1 hour had passed. Only 6 students managed to endure the full training time inside the Glacier Room. Edwin, Jean, Cecilia, Elysia, Thorian, and Arinder. The rest had given up, unable to handle the freezing cold. Professor Sylvia stood at the entrance, holding a paper of name list. She calmly ticked off the names of those who passed and those who didn't. There will be no punishment for this training, she announced. Unlike the running laps, this test is about pushing your limits. Just stay as long as you can. A few students sighed in relief after hearing that. At least we won't get punished, someone whispered, rubbing their arms to chase away the lingering chill. Even the top-ranking students had struggled in that room. Their bodies shivered, their breath fogged up the air, and their movements had slowed with the cold. The glacier room wasn't just cold. It felt like it wanted to freeze you to the bones. Professor Sylvia gave a slow nod as she looked over the list. This batch. So, her eyes briefly showed that she was impressed by the students, thinking seriously about them. They're different, stronger than most first years I've seen. In the past years, the glacier room had crushed nearly every newcomer. Most couldn't last more than 20 minutes, and usually, only one student, if any, managed to endure the full hour during their first attempt. But this year, 6 had passed the test on the first try. This batch might bring real change to Arcadia's future, she thought, folding the attendance sheet slowly. Get some rest, she said. It was finally lunchtime. All were hungry. Inside the Academy's dining hall, there were delicious smells, like the scent of cooked meat, hot vegetables, and soup, floating in the air. Kale grabbed a large tray and walked down the serving line, piling food onto his plate without hesitation. Grilled chicken, rice, dumplings, spicy stew, boiled eggs, bread, and fruit. He didn't care how others looked at him. As usual, Kale ate a massive amount. Bite after bite, he ate everything quickly, like a man refueling a dying engine. He finished his plate clean, then sat for a few more minutes, catching his breath and drinking plenty of water. After lunch, all the first-year students gathered once again at the training ground. The sun was directly overhead now, the air growing hotter. Professor Sylvia appeared, standing at the front with her usual firm expression. The students straightened instinctively at the sight of her. You've completed cold endurance, she said, her voice strong and clear. Now it's time for the final part of today's training. For this whole year, my training consists of 4 types of training. Everyone stood silently, listening. This one, she continued, will test the opposite. Heat endurance, she announced. Murmurs broke out among the students. Sylvia gestured toward the southern part of the training complex. We have a specially designed room, the Inferno Hall. Inside, the temperature remained steady at 60 degrees Celsius. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In there, you will train in combat sparring for 2 full hours, she said. You are free to partner up. But I expect focus, not sloppiness. Endure the heat and improve your coordination under pressure. Some students looked nervous, others determined. Kale took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and prepared himself mentally. First the cold, now the burning heat. Another trial, another wall to climb. 4 days and days, weeks after weeks, a month later, they had been training the same quest, running endless laps, enduring brutal temperatures in the glacier room and the scorch hall, mana theory classes that left their minds numb, combat sparring that battered their bodies black and blue. They went through the same hard and painful training every day, and even though it was exhausting and tough, that very struggle was what was making them stronger. Kale, even among all the students, had built a different rhythm. While others followed the academy schedule, he pushed beyond it. When training ended, he didn't return to his dorm to rest like the others. Instead, he dragged himself to the gym station or back to his room, where the echoes of astral severance still called to him. His body hurt. His mana barely recovered each day. But he didn't stop, because he knew he was behind. Behind the story, behind the heroes, behind those who were meant to be the protagonists. He didn't have time to fall behind. But Kale wasn't the only one training beyond limits. Elysia, too, had not stopped. While she kept an eye on Kale from a distance, still wary, still burdened by the memory of her death at his hands in another timeline, she trained harder than anyone knew. Each day, after lessons and drills, she returned home. There, in the quiet of her personal training room, Edwin often awaited her. Their sparring matches had become a part of her routine. 5 times in 1 month, they clashed with everything they had. 2 of those Elysia had managed to win, barely. The other 3 belonged to Edwin. Tonight, after another intense match, they collapsed onto the padded floor of her training hall. Swords tossed aside, sweat dripping, breaths ragged. "You're a monster," Elysia said with a tired laugh, brushing strands of silver hair from her eyes. "You grow stronger every time." Edwin grinned, leaning his head back against the wall. "You not want to talk. I have to give my all just to keep up." They sat in silence, catching their breath. "You've grown strong a lot," Edwin said softly. "More focused, sharper, like you're training for something personal." Elysia didn't respond right away. She looked up at the ceiling. "Because I am," she thought. According to the novel, every time she spar with Edwin, he wins, but now she wins too. That means the story is going to change. Each night after training, when she lay in her bed, the same memory haunted her. The battlefield, Kale standing above her, sword drenched in blood. He had killed her. No one else knew. No one else could understand. That scene hadn't happened yet, but it will happen. But it had been real to her. And though Kale now, trained alone, wore a quiet expression and seemed lost in his own world, she knew what he was capable of. "I know Kale is strong," she whispered once while gazing out her window, "because he killed me, and that's why I can't face him yet." She clenched her hands into fists. "He's hiding his strength now, but I've seen the truth." That truth drove her. Each day, she came to the academy. She trained harder, fought smarter, and yet, something deep inside her kept whispering, "It's still not enough." Back at Arcadia, the sun reached its peak. The scent of roasted meats, hot broth, and fresh bread filled the academy cafeteria. Kale entered late. He ate huge amount of food, as usual. He ate with purpose, not pleasure, shoveling mouthfuls of food, washing it down with gulps of water. He didn't speak to anyone. After eating, the students once again gathered at the training ground. Sweat still clung to their bodies from the morning glacier room endurance. Professor Sylvia stood waiting. Her gaze swept across the tired faces. Some students muttered under their breath. Even those who had passed the glacier room were beginning to feel the weight of the academy's relentless trials. Kale just closed his eyes, feeling the heat on his skin already. Another test, another trial. "It's fine. I'll endure it." Over the past weeks, he had improved, not by a huge margin, but enough to notice. His stamina had grown a little bit. His mana control had sharpened slightly. An astral severance? He had managed to make it flicker more than once. Just a faint tear in the air, nothing more. But even that was progress. It wasn't much.